First thing he felt was heat. Not fire, not pain, just thick, enveloping warmth. It's if someone had wrapped it in blanket that was as the room. Then came smell. Smoke, wet fur, something animal-like and at the same time alive. And roar. Such low and so loud that my bones vibrated like a tuning fork. Daniel Crow opened his eyes and saw a face. It was the size of Carr, gray leather with veins as if cracks on an old granite, eyes like two yellow lanterns, mouth which could have swallowed it whole. And that face stared at him with an expression that he recognized would in any language, in any the world, in any universe. Tenderness. Pure, absolute maternal tenderness. He lay in her palms. Each palm was the size of a sofa. Fingers as thick as a log wrapped him with all sides, but so carefully as if he were made of thin glass. The 34-year-old Ph.D. of philosophy from the university, specialist in siege war from the Assyrians to Vauban, author of 3 monographs. He lay in the hands a creature standing with a 3-story house, and was measured as a cat. The brain produced 3 thoughts at once. First, this is not a hallucination because hallucinations are not smell wet fur. Second, I don't food because that I don't not kept so carefully. Third, oh my God, they so warm. The giantess lifted him to her face. There parted, and from throat a sound low, guttural, long. It didn't understand but understood the meaning. So is how all newborns understand all planets on all worlds. Small, alive, mine. Okay, thought Daniel Crow as he drifted off to sleep in her palms. We'll figure it out in the morning. In the morning, years in 5. He slept through 3 days. Then he woke up and cried because that he wanted to eat. The giantess fed him goat's milk from a hollowed-out wooden spoon. Every drop was the size of his fist. The milk was warm and sweet and smelled mountain herbs. All around, shadows. Shadows. Huge. Slow. Heavy. With every step shook the ground beneath him. Voices were like rumbling of thunder. He lay in the corner on a bed of straw made of skins and looked up. The ceiling faded in darkness at a height of meters 15. Along the walls danced the reflections from the bonfire. The fire burned in center the cave, in pit lined with stones. Each stone was measured as dining table. Around bonfire were sitting creatures. 6, 7. He couldn't exactly count, because that his eyes still couldn't focus. But he saw the main thing. They were huge. The smallest of them was 6 meters. The biggest was less 8. Gray fur, wide flat faces, hands thick as tree. And they talked. Slowly, with long pauses between words, as if every word had to first be in mercury as a stone before then let out. That what I found him was sitting closer everyone to the fire, her back straight, braids down the waist tied with something stiff. The rest turned to her, and each time slightly tilted their heads. The chief understood Daniel. She is in charge, and she chose me. A month, then 2, then half a year. He grew. More slowly than he, faster than I expected. The body was strange. Human, but not entirely. Fingers thicker than they be. The bones are denser, the skin coarser. As if someone had taken a human blueprint and redrew it with correction to strength. He studied, every day, every hour, every minute. The language came with difficulty. Gurdian was not resembled at like anything that if he knew. The words were long and drawn out, the consonants heavy like stones, vowels drawn out like the wind in a gorge. One word could mean 3 different things depending on how long you held out the last sound. But he learned, because he had no choice. By the time he was 1, he knew 40 words. By 2, 150. By 3, he could form simple sentences and understood almost everything people said around him. And the more he understood, the clearer the picture became. His name was Dan Ul, the child who remained. He was found in the ruins of a mountain hermitage, a stone hut on a mountain pass. A human one. Inside was the body of a woman, young, dead for several days already. Next to her, wrapped in rags, lay him, alive, screaming, hungry. The giantess, Grumata, Quiet Stone, chiefess of the Greystone clan. 240 years old, 8 meters tall. She was walking along the trail when she heard a scream, a human scream, a child's scream. She could have walked past him. She almost did. 200 years ago she lost her son, a crossbow bolt through the throat. Small by Gerd standards, only 120 years old. She carried his skull in a leather pouch on her belt. 200 years. She stopped, bent down, parted the rocks, picked him up, and he reached out his hands to her. Tiny pink fingers, 5 on each palm, like an insect's, like prey's. But he was reaching for her, and he was crying. And she thought what all mothers who have lost children think when they see a stranger's child in distress. No, not again, not on my watch. By the time he was 4, Dan Ul was as tall as a large human child. By 5, he reached Grumate's knee. She carried him on her shoulder when the clan crossed the mountain passes. He sat on her left shoulder, clinging to a braid as thick as a rope, and looked down at the world from above. From a height of 8 meters, the world looked different. The mountains were closer. The sky was lower. The forests looked like thickets. The rivers like streams. The human villages down in the valleys were scattered like matchboxes. And the Gerd were beautiful. He didn't realize this right away. At first, they just seemed big to him. Then slow, then clumsy. But by the time he was 5, he saw what humans had never seen. How a Gerd hunter stands motionless for an hour by a watering hole, waiting for a deer, and blends in with the rock so much that even birds land on his shoulders, like a gourd mother singing a lullaby to her child, her voice so low that it's felt not with the ears but with the chest. Like an old gourd carving a water bowl from a single boulder, each stroke as precise as a jeweler's, only a jeweler works with gold, while he works with granite. They weren't stupid. They weren't savages. They were slow. Their thoughts flowed like mountain rivers, not quickly, but unstoppably. And when a gourd understood something, he understood it forever. By the age of 6, Dan Ul already knew what awaited him. He had overheard conversations by the campfire. The elders spoke of humans, of how the foothills were shrinking every year, how the pastures were disappearing, how human fortresses were rising where the gourd camps once stood, how crossbows were striking farther and with greater accuracy. 3 clans had lost their hunting grounds over the past 10 years. The White Scree clan had gone north into the barren rocks and starved every winter. The young warriors wanted to go down and wreak havoc. The elders shook their heads. They remembered. 400 years ago, one small outsider had already led them down. He burned 3 cities. He killed thousands of people, and the people retaliated. 8,000 Gerd perished in the crusade. 8,000 out of 20. Entire clans vanished. It took 200 years just to restore their numbers. The little tyrant. That's what they called him. The one who came before. The one who promised victory and brought death. Don Uhl sat by the fire and listened, and a chill crept inside him. Because he knew the story. Not their story. The history of his own world. He knew what happened when a great civilization decided to destroy a small one. He knew about the Assyrians and the Babylonians, about the Romans and the Gauls, about the conquistadors and the Aztecs, about colonial wars and indigenous peoples. He knew how it ended. Always the same. Always. And he knew the Gerd had 20 years left. Maybe 25. Maybe 15. But the end was inevitable. Crossbows and walls against clubs and boulders. Engineering against brute force. Organization against courage. This isn't war. It's arithmetic. And the arithmetic wasn't on the Guard's side. Unless someone changed the terms of the equation. Don Uhl stared into the fire. He was 6 years old. He was as tall as a grown man. He had thick fingers and strong bones, and a mind that held 20 years of academic study in the history of siege warfare. He knew everything about trebuchets and battering rams and bastions and tunnels and the psychology of sieges. He knew how a garrison's will broke on the 7th day and on the 14th. He knew why a great army without a supply train would perish in 2 weeks. He knew how the Chinese mounted the trebuchet's axle on bronze bushings. He knew the weak spot of any wall because he'd written a dissertation on it. But he couldn't do anything with his hands. He was a theorist, a historian, a bookworm. In his past life, he couldn't even fix a bathroom faucet. Now his fingers were as thick as a human wrist, and any kind of delicate work was impossible for him in principle. He needed hands. Other people's hands. Lots of hands. And he needed trust. The trust of a people who remembered that the last little outsider with big ideas had wiped out a fifth of their race. He was 6 years old, and he decided to begin. Don Uhl began with small things, not with cars, not from fortifications, from ropes. Gertie did not know how to weave rope. To be more precise, they knew how to, but in their own way. They took the tendons from the beast, twisted into a single layer, and tied the ends node. It turned out a strand with a length at a couple meters, a sturdy but short. Don Uhl showed how to braid a through from 3 strands plant fiber, bast from young linden trees. He peeled the bark himself, heased in a stream. It split into strips, 3 strips, one across another, the left in the center, right to center, left to center. Gertie were watching, 8 adult warriors, each taller 6 meters. They stood in a semicircle and watched as the 6-year-old little boy, who was them up to knee, was weaving a rope on ground. One of them crouched down. His knees were at level at head Don Uhl's. He held out a finger as thick with a shovel, and it tried to repeat it. The bass tore into his hands. It was strong. Fingers, 2 rough movements. Don Uhl shook his head. He took a finger gird and placed on it 3 stripes. He showed it. Don't drag. Don't squeeze. Place one on another, gently, just like a mother puts a child in cradle. Gerd tried again. The bast broke. 3rd attempt. 4th. On the 5th it worked. The curved short pigtail in 3 strands, but it held on. Gerd lifted her up the light and looked at her like that as they at the first caught deer. After a week, 5 Gerd wove ropes. For a month, 12. The ropes were coarse and thick, each strand with a thickness about Don Uhl's donula, but they were long, very long, and strong. Gerd could hang on such rope with body, and it didn't struggle. "Why?" asked Grumata. She was by the entrance to cave, and she was cleaning the hide of a goat with a knife made obsidian. The knife was about a human sword. "Why the ropes?" Daniel sat next her foot. Her foot was long as his height. He picked up a stone about fist and placed it on flat boulder, then picked up a stick about 1.5 meters long. "I put down a stick on small stone, so that one end is longer than the other." The short end he placed a fist-sized stone. He pressed on long end. The stone flew up onto 3 meters. Grumata followed him with her eyes. The stone fell into the grass into 10 steps. She looked at Daniela. He did, said. He knew that she understood. Gertie slowly think, but when they realize, then they understand forever. She turned toward the mountains. There behind the ridges stood human fortresses, with double walls along 20 meters, with abysses and towers and crossbows which struck the Gerds from a distance at which those could not answer. The stones, thought Grumata. He once throw stones, far away. She placed her hand on his head. Her hand covered his from the top to shoulders. She didn't say a word, but did she her hand for a minute. It was 7 when he first ended up into trouble because of Brukmara. Brukmar was the second warrior of the clan, 7.5 meters, wider than most Gurthas across shoulders, fists like an anvil, a scar across face from a fight with a bear whose he killed with his bare hands in 400 years. He was 460 and po. Gurunian standards, he was in the prime. He wanted become a leader. 20 years wanted to. According the co-head of the chiefs may be replaced through a duel at the council fire, challenge and defeat. But Grumata was stronger. Each in the clan knew that. She was 0.5 meter taller and by 50 years older, and when she got up in full height, Brukmar beside with her seemed a teenager. That's why he waited. He waited until she would weaken, until she grew old, until gives give, and that's Donal. Little, human, a stranger. And Grumata listened him. She sat on council bonfire, and when the little boy spoke she tilted her head. She, quiet stone, the one did bowed her head nor to anyone. Brukmar didn't look at it, and its stone cheekbones clenched so that they creaked. The first time he approached to Donalu by the stream, Donal was standing on knee-deep in water and was washing the bast for ropes. A shadow covered it. He raised his head. Brukmar stood over him, 7.5 meters of anger. He bent down. His face turned out to be a meter from Donala's. Donala. His breath was hot and smelled musty flesh. He spoke 3 words, slowly, with pauses. You are not ours. Donal stood in the icy water and looked into the eyes of a creature that could kill him with a single snap of its fingers. His heart was pounding. His hands were shaking. But his mind was working. He knew people like this. In every organization, every tribe, every army, there is a Brukmar. Someone who senses that the world is changing and hates the one bringing about that change. You can't defeat him by force. You can't out-argue him in council. You can't complain to the chieftainess, because then he'll become the one hiding behind his mother's skirt. You have to make sure that Brukmar himself becomes part of the change, or get rid of him altogether. But not now. Right now, he's 7, and he's standing knee-deep in the stream. Danul bowed his head, not out of fear, out of calculation. He lowered his neck. Among the Gurd, this signified acknowledgement of seniority, not submission, acknowledgement. I see you. You're stronger. I won't argue. Brookmar snorted. He straightened up. He walked away. The ground trembled beneath his footsteps for another minute after he disappeared behind the trees. Danul stood in the water for another 5 minutes. He waited until his knees stopped shaking. Then he went back to work. He was 8 when he made his first lever, a real one, not a demonstration pebble on a stick, but a working tool. The clan needed to move a boulder. A huge chunk of granite had blocked the trail after a landslide. 3 adult Gurdas braced their shoulders against it. The boulder didn't budge. 5 of them, to no avail. The stone was wedged in the ground and wasn't going anywhere. Danul arrived with 2 young Gurdas who were already used to his strange requests. He asked for a log, a long one, a sturdy one. They brought a pine tree, a whole one, 20 meters long. He showed them where to dig under the boulder, a small hole, right at one edge. Then he showed them where to place a support stone, a small, flat, stable stone, 1 meter from the edge of the boulder. Then he ordered them to push one end of the log into the hole under the boulder. The long end of the log jutted out 15 meters in the other direction. 1 young Gurd hung from the long end. The boulder shifted 1/2 meter. A second one wedged a stone into the gap. The first one hung from it again. Another 1/2 meter. In 10 minutes, the boulder had been pushed off the trail. The 3 Gurds stood and stared at the empty spot where a boulder had just been, one that 5 of their kin had been unable to move. Then they looked at Danul. He was sitting on a supporting rock, swinging his legs. He was 8 years old. By Gurd standards, he weighed as much as a cat. And he had just moved what 5 warriors had been unable to move. The word spread throughout the clan within a day. The little one who stayed. He knows how to make the stone obey. By evening, 4 more had come to him. Young, curious. They sat around him in a semicircle. Each of them was 5 times his height. They looked up at him because they were sitting while he stood on the stone. And they waited. "Show us some more," one of them said. Danul smiled. He was 8 years old, and he had his first students. By the time he was 9, he was ready for a real trick. An oak. An old one. A thick one. Its trunk was so wide that 2 Gurdas couldn't wrap their arms around it. The clan needed a log for a bridge across the gorge. 8 warriors spent 3 days striking the trunk with clubs. The bark flew off in chunks. The wood buckled. But the oak stood firm. The Gurdas were strong, but they didn't understand the tree. They struck it head-on, just as they would strike an enemy in single combat. But a tree isn't an enemy. A tree is a challenge. Danul arrived at night. With him were 2 of his apprentices, young Gurd warriors. They brought axes, not clubs. Axes that Danul had taught them to make. The stone blade was tied to the handle not on top, as they had done before, but in a split. Stronger. More precise. He demonstrated. A horizontal cut from below. At an angle. Deep into the trunk, 1/3 of the diameter. Then a countercut from above, from the opposite side, also at an angle. They worked for 3 hours, quietly, at night, while the clan slept. In the morning, Danul drew a line on the ground with charcoal, a straight line, from the trunk in the right direction. Then he called over one of his students and said one word. Push. Gerd braced his palms against the trunk. He pushed. He didn't strike it. He didn't chop at it. He just pushed. The oak creaked, slowly, majestically, and fell, exactly along the line, exactly where the charcoal line pointed. 20 warriors stood in silence. They hadn't been able to fell this oak for 3 days, and the boy had done it in a single night. Not with strength, with his mind. Grumata approached. Her footsteps were like drum beats. She stopped above Don Ul. She placed her hand on his head. Her palm covered him from the top of his head to his shoulders. She said one word. Speak. Don Ul raised his head. He knew what that meant. He now had the right to speak at the bonfire council. At 9 years old, a man among giants, the boy who remained. That evening the council was held. The bonfire burned in the center of the clearing. The elders sat around it, 12 guards, each over 300 years old. Each had fought dozens of duels. Each bore scars as badges of honor. And among them, on a small stone next to the chiefess's throne, sat Don Ul, as tall as a full-grown man, 9 years old, with thick fingers and a head full of knowledge that no one in this world could even imagine. Brookmar looked at him across the fire, and in his yellow eyes something dark and patient burned. He could wait. He had waited 20 years. He would wait some more. First thing Don Ul did after the right to vote this kept quiet, 3 pieces of advice in a row. He sat on his rock next with Grumati and listened. The elders were discussing the hunt, the boundaries of the pastures, disputes with the blue moss over the stream. Ordinary business, nothing urgent. He remained silent because he knew the rule that works in any society from university board to the military headquarters. The right to speak and duty to speak are different things. If he starts spouting ideas at every meeting, they'll stop listening in a month. He will background noise. Background noise. A strange little kid who all time is mumbles. No, we need to wait. Wait the moment when his words will be the only answer to the question that torments everyone. The moment has, in 4th meeting, the scout of the returned from the southern slope, a young Gerd named Koran, 6 meters, left arm hung like a whip. The crossbow bolt pierced shoulder right through it. The bolt was made of steel. Human. Soyeon hadn't been in their lives, and wounds were treated in the old way. Moss. Fat. Weight. The Koran rose before the council and spoke. The people put a new outpost, down below, on the trail that led to the southern pastures. A stone tower. A palisade all around. 20 crossbowmen. He came at night to take a look. They was spotted. Shots were fired. He ran. 1 bullet hit its mark. The started humming. A low, heavy hum, as if the engine's the stones. Again. Once more. And 1 outpost. 1 piece of that is no belongs the gangs. Brookmar stood up. His voice was like a stone against a stone. You have to go and break, how we used to as always, at night, 10 warriors, to tear down the palisade, crush the tower, trample people. 3 elders nodded, the others remained silent. Grumata was silent as well. She looked at her shoulder Koranas, and into her eyes Don Ul saw calculation. Not anger, not fear. Calculation. She calculated. 10 warriors in night attack on stone tower by crossbowmen. How long will return? 8, 6, 4. How many of them will injured? All of them. The crossbow hits at 150 steps. Gerd runs slowly. The target is huge. They will strike from a distance at which it is impossible. Even if the guards break the tower, even if they kill all people, in a month, people will build a new one, in a double garrison, with a breach, with oil pots. That's that people know how to. One thing that Gurdas can't. They know how to build. Danul raised his hand, a small one, according Gurdian standards tiny, but everyone saw it. That's that he was sitting next with the leader, and that's because everyone remembered the oak tree. He began to speak, slowly, in Gurdian, with pauses, just the Gurdas, one word for after. It's hard, and unhurriedly. He said that Brukmar was right. The tower needs to be demolished. But not with your hands. With your hands is no good. With your hands it hurts. With my hands, people die. He said that there is another way, a long one, difficult. But when it is, be not one gird, not will approach to the wall closer than 200 steps. That's because the stones will fly on their own. The council fell silent. The stones will fly on their own. The Gurdas exchanged glances. Brukmar snorted. The stones don't fly. Stones lie there. Danul didn't argue. He stood up from his rock. He walked over to the fire. He picked up an ember and began to draw on flat stone by the fire. He drew a simple diagram. Frame, crossbar, sling, counterweight. 4 lines, nothing than that. He pointed with his finger at counterweight and said, "This stone." He pointed at sling and said, "A light stone." He pointed at crossbar and said, "Look here. A heavy pulls and light flies." Silence. Then Grumata leaned forward. She looked at the drawing. Her yellow eyes moved from one line to another, slowly, just always. Then she raised her eyes at Danula. "How far?" she asked. He replied, "Far away." How much farther than can throw the strongest warrior? Next than strikes a human crossbow. Further than you can to throw a stone by hand from the summit of the mountain. She nodded. One slow nod. "Show me." She don't, on advice. "Show me." He was building his first model 2 months. A small one, from the young birch and ropes that wove by disciples. Rama in 3 meters tall. Funny in Gurdian standards. The lever arm was made of sanded pine. The sling was woven from bast rope. A counterweight, a basket of stones. 200 kilograms. He spent every evening making calculations. He sketched with charcoal on the cave walls. The ratio of the lever arms, the mass of the counterweight to the mass of the projectile, angle of launch, length of the sling. He remembered the formulas. He remembered the tables from his own monograph. But there was no calculator here. There were no metal parts. There were no precision tools. Everything had to be done by eye, by feel, by experience, which he lacked because in his past life he had been a theorist, not a builder. The first shot failed. The sling got caught on the frame. The stone flew upward and landed 3 meters from the vehicle, nearly killing Danul himself. Second shot. The counterweight was too heavy. The frame creaked and snapped. Third shot. The sling was too short. The stone flew off, but to the side, into a tree. Fourth. Fifth. Sixth. Each time he took the machine apart, fixed it, and put it back together. Each time his students helped in silence. They hauled logs and stones and ropes and never once asked why. Because they saw the oak tree. Because they believed the little boy. On the 7th shot, the stone flew. Not far, about 40 meters, but it flew. In an arc, high up and down, and it struck the slope with a dull thud that echoed through the gorge. The 4 Gurdas stood and watched. The stone lay 40 meters from the car. They hadn't thrown it. They hadn't rolled it. They hadn't kicked it. The car had thrown it itself. One of the students slowly turned his head toward Don Ulu. There was something new in his eyes. Not surprise, not admiration. Understanding. If a small machine throws a small rock 40 paces, then a big machine will throw a big rock. He didn't finish the thought. He didn't know how to count, but he understood, and it was written on his face so clearly that Don Ulu felt a lump in his throat. They can understand. They aren't stupid. They just had never seen it before. And now they had seen. He began building a large model, a 6-meter frame, a lever arm made of solid pine, a counterweight weighing half a metric ton. For the gird, hauling such loads was no more difficult than it was for a human to carry a backpack. That was where their strength lay, not in battle, in construction. A single gird could lift a log that 10 people couldn't budge. 4 girds could erect a frame in a day that a human crew would take a week to complete. The problem was precision. Gird hands were made for braking, not for fastening. Knots came undone. Axles warped. Fastening points cracked because the gird tightened them too much. Don Ulu realized he needed a master. Not a strong man, a master. Someone whose hands were more skillful than the rest. He began to look around. He walked through the clan's encampment. He watched who was working and how. How they cut meat. How they sewed hides. How they hewed stones for hearths. Most worked roughly, efficiently, but roughly. They tore rather than cut. They struck rather than chiseled. One old gird woman was carving bone needles for sewing, thin by gird standards, as thick as a pencil. She worked slowly, carefully. Every movement was precise. Don Ulu sat down beside her and watched for an hour. Then he asked her to help. She looked down at him. "Why?" she asked. "I need hands that don't break things," he said. She came over, and with her help, the fastenings finally stopped cracking. The knots held. The axle didn't warp. By the time he was 10, Don Ulu had finished building a large model, a 6-meter frame, a half-metric ton counterweight, a 20-kilogram projectile, a stone the size of a human head. He invited the council, all 12 elders, as well as Brookmara and Grumatu. They stood in a semicircle on the clearing behind the parking lot. The target was marked with charcoal on a rock 200 paces away, a white circle the size of a gird's head. Don Ulu stood by the machine. His students were in position, one at the trigger mechanism, one at the winch, and 2 holding the frame in case it veered off course. He raised his hand, lowered it. The trigger lever dropped. The counterweight crashed down. The lever's arm shot upward. The sling lashed out. The stone flew off, high, in an arc, with a high-pitched whistle that grew louder and louder. The stone struck the rock, 15 paces from the target. A miss. But the rock cracked. A 20-kilogram stone, flying at a speed no gird could ever achieve with a hand throw, slammed into the granite and left a crater a palm's depth. From 200 paces, without a single warrior within 100 paces of the target. The 12 elders were silent. Brookmara was silent. Grumata was silent. The silence lasted so long that Don Ulu began to grow afraid. And then one of his students, a young one, the very one who had been the first to grasp the principle of the lever, drew a deep breath and roared. Low, loud, so loud that leaves rained down from the trees, and the other 3 joined in, and the elders. one after another. The roar rolled through the gorge and echoed off the walls. The earth trembled, not from footsteps, from the voice. From the voice of a people who, for the first time in their lives, saw that a stone could fly. Grumata did not roar. She stood and looked at the crater in the rock, then at Don Ula, then back at the crater, and an expression appeared on her stony face that Daniela had seen only once in his life, when she found him in the ruins of the hermitage, when she picked him up and held him to her chest. Hope. After the shot, life changed. Not right away, not in day, but Daniel felt it as the wind. Before, two had approached out of curiosity. Now they approached with questions. How to sew that the axe fits more securely? How to sew that the day doesn't leak? How to sew that the meat last go bad? He didn't know the answers to half of questions. He was a historian, but not an engineer, not a craftsman, not a builder. But he knew the principles, and the principles worked. The axe is more securely if the handle is wedged and not tied down. The day does not leaks if the hides are laid overlapping but not end to end. The meat lasts if it's smoked and not air dry it. Simple things, obvious to any earthly peasant, revolutionary for Gerd. But the main was the onager, its first projectile machine. Small, rough, inaccurate, and completely useless compared to this fortress. He knew that. Onager throws stones at 200 steps. The human wall, in 20 meters tall, can support a 20-kilogram stone without a single crack. He needed a trebuchet with counterweight, a real one, large, with a counterweight of 5 metric tons and a projectile in 200 kilograms, such that throws boulder at 400 steps and breaks through the stonework. But between the onagron and the trebuchet lay a chasm. Not technical, political. He had hardware. A lot iron. The trebuchet must be made of metal. A wooden breaks after 20 shots. In the Greystone did have iron. To be more precise, there had several human swords and arrowheads collected after skirmishes. But forge, they didn't know how to. No one in the clan could. Iron was human magic. Black stone that people used to get into shiny blade. Gordas did not understand how, and didn't particularly want to understand. Why forge a knife if you can split obsidian and get a blade sharper than any iron? But obsidian is brittle and small. An obsidian knife measuring half a meter is the limit. But trebuchet must be 2 meters long and 10 centimeters in diameter, made a single piece. Donul knew where there was iron. The blue moss, 3 days on the to east across the pass. At them had a blacksmith, the only Gerdian blacksmith in all 9 clans. Old Gerdbai, named Tongar, who 100 years ago captured the forge, together with the blacksmith. Human blacksmith lived with the Gerd 20 years and taught Tongara the basics. Then he died of old age. Tongar forged knives and tips for spears, rough, heavy, but iron. The problem was in the fact that the blue moss was not with the Greystone. He at odds with them, but nor did a friend. Between them lay a dispute over a stream that stretched 3 generations. The stream flowed along the border territories, and both clans considered it one of their own. A trifle by human standards. A reason for endless cold hostility toward Gerdian. Dan Ul arrived to Grumate and said, I need to go to Blue Moss. She looked at him from above. Why, she asked. I need their blacksmith, he said. She remained silent, for a long time, in the Gerd style. 5. Then she said, You, little one. He nodded. They'll crush if they get offended, she. He nodded. She remained silent for 5 minutes. Then she stood up. "I'll with you, she said. They were for 3 days, Grumata. Dan-ul on her shoulder, 2 warriors escort, across the pass where snow lay even in the summer, through the rocky gorge where the wind howled like this that the Gurdas covered their ears, through the forest of pine trees, every of which was thick as a Gordian leg. The blue moss lived in the valley between 2 mountains, not in caves, in stone enclosures, round walls made of boulders stacked without mortar, roofs made hides stretched on poles. 27 families, about 150 gourd. Their leader, Kroshan Blue Mock, was old, very old, almost 400 years, according Gordian standards, the old man. He sat by his campfire and didn't get up when Grumata entered into camp. This was rude. Among leaders it is customary to stand up. But he was 2, and all this understood. Grumata sat across from him. Dan-ul sat next to her on knee, little, quiet. He didn't speak. He listened. The conversation went on 2 hours, slow, drawn out. They didn't in a hurry. They exchanged phrases with pauses of a minute between them. They discussed the hunt, the weather, the landslide on the western slope, a herd of mountain goats that had headed south earlier than usual. Not a word about the stream, not a word about the matter at hand. First, the custom. Dan-ul waited. After 2 hours, Kroshan finally looked at him. For a long time, intently. His eyes were clouded by age, but the mind behind them was sharp. "It's that kid," he said. Grumata nodded. "The one who felled the tree," said Kroshan. "The rumors have reached Blue Moss." Grumata nodded again. Kroshan reached out his hand, huge, wrinkled, with fingers twisted by age. He placed a finger on Dan-ul's head, gently, as if touching something fragile. "Little one," he said. Dan-ul bowed his neck, an acknowledgement of seniority. Kroshan withdrew his hand. "What do you want?" he asked. "Not Grumata, Dan-ul." "Directly," Dan-ul replied. "He wants to see the forge." Silence. Kroshan looked at him. "Why?" he asked. Dan-ul told the truth. Because he needs an iron axle, a long one, a strong one that can't be made from stone or bone, for a machine that throws stones. Kroshan was silent for a minute, 2, 3. Then he turned to one of his warriors and said, "Bring Tongar." The Blue Moss clan's forge was in a cave at the edge of the valley. Tongar was 360 years old. He wasn't tall for a Gurd, 6.5 meters, but he was broad, incredibly broad. His shoulders were broader than those of Gurd, who stood 7 meters tall. His arms were like tree trunks. His palms were black with ingrained soot that hadn't been washed off in 100 years. He stood by the forge. The forge was lined with stone and coated with clay. The bellows were made of bull hides. Each bellows was the size of a human boat. On the anvil, a huge flat stone. A workpiece lay there, a meter-long strip of red-hot iron. Tongar held a hammer. The hammer weighed as much as a grown man. He struck the workpiece, steadily, rhythmically. Sparks flew like fireflies. The metal sang under the blows. Dan-ul watched. He looked at the forge, the bellows, the anvil, the hammer, and the blacksmith's hands, and he saw everything that was wrong. The forge was too small. The bellows supplied too little air. The temperature was insufficient. Tongar was forging iron, not steel. He couldn't raise the temperature high enough to burn out the carbon. His pieces were soft. They bent. They rusted quickly. But it was iron. Real iron. And Don Ull realized he could work with it. He stepped closer.
Tongar stopped striking and looked down at him. Standing next to the blacksmith was a girl, a young Gerdk, 6.5 meters tall. Her red braids were smudged with soot. She was pumping the bellows. Her hands were as black as her father's. But Don Ull noticed something else. When she released the bellows and straightened up, she looked at the workpiece on the anvil. She wasn't just looking. She was looking the way Don Ull looked at his blueprints, with hunger, with a thirst. She wanted to forge, not to pump the bellows, to forge. He saw it, and he remembered. Tongar listened to his request. An iron axle, 2 meters long, 10 centimeters in diameter. Solid. The blacksmith shook his head. "Too big," he said. "I don't have that much iron." Don Ull nodded. He'd expected that. He proposed a deal. The Greystone clan knows where there's ore in the mountains. Redstone in the cliffs on the western slope. Don Ull had seen it on walks with Grumata. He wasn't a metallurgist, but he knew what iron ore looked like. Brown iron ore. It's impossible to mistake it. He offered the ore in exchange for labor. Greystone would mine and bring the ore. Blue Moss would forge it. Tongar looked at him for a long time. Then he looked at his daughter by the firs, then back at Dan Ull. "Ore," he said. "A lot of ore." "A lot," Dan Ull replied. "As much as you can carry." Tongar turned to Croshan. The old chieftain stood at the cave entrance, listening. He said nothing, but he nodded, once, slowly. Thus began the alliance. Not a grand one, not a solemn one, without oaths or ceremonies. Ore in exchange for iron, a simple exchange, but the first in the history of the 9 clans when 2 clans agreed on something more than the division of a stream. As they left, the blacksmith's red-haired daughter stood at the cave entrance and watched them go. Dan Ull turned over Grumata's shoulder. Their eyes met, for a second. Then she turned away and went back into the cave, to her furs. He was 10, she was 18. But Gordas matures slowly, and at 18, a Gerdka is still a teenager. He remembered her face, smudged with soot, with red tufts of hair poking out from under her belt, and her eyes, greedy, hungry, the eyes of a craftsman who's been denied his hammer. He'll be back. He'll definitely be back. The first shipment of ore left a month later. 10 baskets, each basket weighing half a metric ton. For ordinary people, that would have been a caravan of 20 carts. For the Gerd, 4 porters. They carried the ore across the pass in a single day. Tongar began smelting, slowly. His blast furnace didn't provide enough heat. Half the ore turned to slag. But from the 10 baskets, he obtained enough iron for a single axle. 2 months of work, blow after blow. The axle was rough, a little crooked, with pits in the metal, but it was made of iron, and it was 2 meters long. When they brought it to the Greystone camp, Don Ull placed his hand on the warm metal. It smelled of coal, sweat, and smoke. It smelled of the future. The axle lay on ground, and Don Ull walked around it as around an altar. 2 meters of iron, rough, a bit crooked, with sinks and irregularities all the length. Any civil would look at it and shook his head. But here it was a miracle. The first piece iron in history of the Greystone. It began to build trebuchet in first day of the year of new life. Big, real, not a model, not a toy, a combat vehicle. Frame made of 4 pine logs,
each trunk 20 meters long and meter in diameter. People needed wood oxen and blocks and ropes and 3 days of work to install one such pole. 4 gird lifted them the morning. They dug the foundation, tied the tops with crossbars. We installed the axle. And that's the problems. Here didn't fit into grooves. Daniel carved grooves in crossbar, or more precisely his students carved it, with chisels. The grooves were uneven. The axis in them was loose. With every bounce she thudded against the edge and the iron grated against the wood. He knew that was needed. A bushing. A bronze bushing that wraps around the axle and rests in grooves snugly. He read about it. He wrote about this. The Chinese used bronze sleeve on their trebuchets for 300 years before the Europeans. That is why Chinese cars were more accurately. But the bronze was, and casting was, and the craftsman who could have cast a bushing it wasn't. He tried to do without her. He wrapped the axle wet hides. He placed strips of birch bark. He coated them with fat. It turned out better. The axle swayed more smoothly. But at every shot the hides slipped and it was had to rewound. That was unacceptable. In battle, there is time to rewind. Daniel stood by the unfinished machine and looked at the axle. All around him stood his disciples, 10 gourdas, young, strong, ready to haul and dig and chop, but not one of them could help with that he needs. He needed was not strong man. He needed a jeweler. He thought 3 days, then sent a messenger to Blue Moss. The message was simple. I need a blacksmith who will forge a bushing for the axle trebuchet. Not just blacksmith, one specific one, your daughter. The answer came a week. Tongar came by himself. He stood by the councils of the council, huge, wide, black arms crossed across chest. He didn't know. My daughter was not a blacksmith. A daughter blows the bellows. A woman gives birth and doesn't beats. Such is the custom. Daniel sat in his rock. Little, 11 years old, according to Gordian standards, a baby. He looked at Tongara and began to speak, slowly, respectfully, without urgency. He said that he had seen the hands Tongara's, strong hands, the best of the 9 clans. But he doesn't not strength. He needs precision. The bushing must be flat, smooth, with deviation not more the width a hair. Such thing cannot be knocked out with a hammer. You thing must be cultivated. With a blow, feeling metal. He said that he had seen his daughter Tongara looks at anvil, and he saw how she touches ready-made knives when my father can't. Not the handle, the blade, with the fingertips, as if reading. Tongara remained silent. A minute, 2, 3. His face was like stone, but something in his eyes flinched. He knew. Of course he knew. He saw it every day. Just, his daughter is by the bellows, and her gaze is fixed, not to the fire, but to an anvil, like she picks up scraps and secretly taps on them with a hammer on forges. Just her fingers are then her, him, himself, and he knows, but maybe can't admit, because that custom. Daniel said that. I need a master who can, a sleeve for a trebuchet. Only one master, your daughter. Tongara was watching at him, for a long time, then turned and walked away, without saying a word. Daniel sat on a rock and didn't know it turned out or not. The answer came in 3 days. Not word, by action. Tae-in came by herself, with a hammer on her shoulder. The hammer was old, Tongarov, That very one he forged knives and tips 100 years. He gave her his hammer. She stood in front of Danu and remained silent. 6.5 meters. Red braids stained soot. In hands, burns from sparks. They're fresh. She was training. All 3 days after the conversation, she trained. Danu showed her the drawing. With a piece of coal on the stone. Bushing. Cylinder with a hole inside. Outer diameter exactly matches with groove. The inner exactly aligns with axis. The thickness wall is uniform through the length. Taein looked at drawing. Her eyes darted from line to line. She raised her hand and ran her finger across the drawing. Here, she asked, she pointing toward the surface. Smooth. Completely smooth. Danu nodded. She nodded in response. And she to her hill. She was a bushing for 20 days. The first 5 blanks burst as cooling. The 6th turned out crooked. The 7th was almost straight, but the inner diameter turned out to be at a finger larger than needed. Each time she started all over again, in silence, without complaints. She came to the corner at AT and left after sunset. Danu came every day. He could help with forging. His hands were too small for Gurdian hammer. But it could help with the calculations. He measured each workpiece, with a stick with notches, his own system of measures. He said where thicker, where is thinner, where is the nay is unevenly. Taein listened, and corrected it. The beat for blow. At 21st day, she brought him a sleeve. He took it with both hands. She was heavy, hot still from cooling, smooth on the inside. He ran his finger along the inner surface. Smooth. Almost perfect. He looked at Taein. She was standing in front of him, and in first time for all days it was covered soot. It had been washed off. She braided her again. She brought him not the blank. She brought him her first creation. The first item she made herself. Not apprentice. The master. He said one word. Okay. She didn't smiled. Gerties rarely smile. But her shoulders drooped by inch, as if from them of a stone that she was carrying 18 years. The sleeve stood on the turn, as if it were for her had been cast. Danuel hammered the wedges, secured it. He swung the shoulder of the lever. The lever rotated into the groove. Smoothly, without a squeak. No backlash. Smooth. He heard a faint whistle of metal against metal, and this sound was better as any music. Now it was to go further. Lever of the lever, a 12-meter pine tree. Trimmed, sanded, straight as an arrow. Short end 3 meters, the long end 9 meters. The ratio 1 to 3. He knew that the optimal ratio closer to 1 to 4 or 1 to 5. But for the first car, 1 to 3 was enough. Safer, less strain on axle, counterweight. Basket made of woven twigs tied ropes. In basket, stones. Many stones. 3 metric tons. For the girds to load 3 metric tons rocks, that 10 minutes of work. 1 gird, 1 stone, 1 movement. Sling. A rope made woven bark, 2 meters. At end there's a pocket for a projectile. Projectile. Boulder. Round. Whetstone. 100 kilograms. Human trebuchet threw stones at 50 to 100 kilograms. Gursky could afford more. But Danuel began with small things. The trigger mechanism. Hook on rope. Pull the rope and the counterweight falls. Simple. Reliable. Rough. But it works. The machine was ready in 2 weeks after the bushing. It had been in clearing behind the parking lot. 15 meters in height to the top of the frame. Arm of the lever rested on side secured with ropes. The counterweight is loaded. Sling was laid. The shell in pocket. The entire clan came to watch.
Not only the elders, everyone. Everyone 170 gird of the Greystone. Warriors, women, children, elderly people. They stood in a semicircle, huge gray figures against background the mountains. Silence hung such that you could be as a rope on frame. Don Uhl stood by the trigger mechanism, next to 4 of his best disciples. The crew. The first crew in the history of the Gerd. Everyone in their place, everyone knows their task. They had rehearsed 40 times, without a projectile, without a counterweight. Just the movements. Stand up, check the sling, check the ropes, load, step back, wait for the command. Don Uhl raised his hand. Silence. He lowered his hand. The first apprentice pulled the release rope. The hook opened. 3 metric tons of rocks crashed downward. The lever's arm shot upward. The sling whipped through the air, and a 100-kilogram boulder soared into the sky. It flew for 3 seconds. 3 seconds that Don Uhl would remember for the rest of his life. The rock arced upward, higher than the trees, higher than the cliffs. Its shadow glided across the clearing, and then it began its descent. The rock struck the slope 400 paces from the vehicle. The ground shook. A fountain of mud and debris shot up 10 meters. A rumble rolled through the gorge and echoed back. 3 times. A crater remained in the slope, 1 meter deep, 2 meters wide, from a 100-kilogram rock dropped from 400 paces away. 170 Gerd stood in silence. 3 seconds. 5. 10. Then they roared, all at once. The roar was so loud that branches, not leaves, rained down from the nearest trees. The ground shook not from the impact of the rock, but from the voice. From the voice of a people who understood, who had finally understood. The rocks are coming. Don Uhl stood by the car, small, 11 years old, a child by Gerd standards, and he wasn't roaring along with them. He was looking at the crater in the hillside, 400 paces. The wall of the human fortress was 20 meters high. The wall was 3 meters thick, built of masonry. 100-kilogram boulder from 400 paces away. No, it won't break through. Not yet. But this was the first machine. The first. A crude one, with a crooked axle and a rope sling. When he builds the 5th, the 10th. When Taein learns to forge steel instead of just iron. When the axle is steel and the sling is leather, and the projectile is 200 kilograms of hewn granite. Then, he looked at Taein. She was standing apart from the crowd, a hammer on her shoulder, soot on her face, and she wasn't looking at the crater. She was looking at the axle, at her own bushing, which had held up, which hadn't burst, which had worked. Her first creation had just hurled a stone 400 paces. Their eyes met. She nodded, once. He nodded back. That was their conversation, the whole of it. 2 nods, but it meant more than any words. We did it, together. That evening, by the Grumot Council's campfire, she sat next to Don Uhl. She didn't talk about the trebuchet. She talked about something else, about what happened 400 years ago, about Little Tyrant. Don Uhl listened. She spoke slowly, with pauses. His name was Rodrigo. That's how the Gerd pronounced it. He arrived small, like Don Uhl, a man among giants. But he didn't arrive as a child. He arrived as a warrior, with weapons, with armor, with fire in his eyes. He was strong for a man, fast, and he knew how to kill. He challenged the clan chief to a duel, a human sword against a Gerd fist. The chief laughed. The little one wants to fight. Rodrigo severed the tendons in both of his legs in a minute. The chief fell, and Rodrigo stood over him and declared himself the new chief. According to the law of the duel, it was legitimate. No one argued. He led them down, into the valleys, toward the human cities. He promised revenge, promised land, promised freedom from the humans forever. 3 cities burned. Thousands of people died. The Gurd drank in their victory like water, sweetly, greedily, not realizing the water was poisoned. The humans struck back. A united army of the 9 kingdoms. 200,000 spears. They came into the mountains and killed everything that moved. 8,000 Gurd perished, out of 20,000. 2 clans were completely wiped out. The Rigid clan vanished. No one knows how. No one knows where. All that remained were his belongings in the cave. A strange bronze tube with a hole in it. An iron shoulder pad with a design on it. Scraps of incomprehensible clothing. For 200 years, the Gurd people recovered. For 200 years, they buried the dead and gave birth to the living, slowly forgetting and yet unable to forget. Grumata fell silent. Donal sat next to her foot. He was silent. She looked down at him. Her eyes were dark in the light of the fire. "I wanted to kill you," she said, "when I found you. I knew the legend, a little man among giants. I picked up a stone, but you were crying, and you reached out your hands to me." She fell silent. Donal felt something inside him break, quietly, without a crack, like ice in spring. She could have killed him, and she had every right to. After everything Rodrigo had done to her people, she had every right to crush the little man in the ruins of the skit and forget him. But she couldn't, because he was crying, because he was reaching out. "You're different," she said. "You're not Rodrigo. But I'm scared." He raised his head, looked into her eyes, huge, yellow, ancient, and replied, "Me too." She placed her palm on his head. Her hand was warm and heavy and rough, like a mountain, like a home. They sat like that for a long time. The fire was dying down. The embers glowed red. Stars shone through the smoke. Somewhere in the mountains, a she-wolf howled. And Donal thought of Rodrigo de Almanzor, an infantry captain, a conquistador, a man who came into this world with a sword and ended in disaster. And he thought of himself, a historian, a theorist, a man who came into this world with nothing but knowledge in his head. And he made a vow to himself, silently, without words, without fanfare, a simple one. I will do things differently. Danulu was 12 when he first killed a person. Not with his hands, by order. Scout Koran ran at dawn, the people on the trail. 4 of them, not merchants. The merchants' mules and bundles, with these knives and crossbows and dark clothing without coats of arms. They walked up the southern slope, quietly, fast, professional. Danul knew who it was. Killers. Anselm de Leaf finally decided to check out the rumors about a strange shaman in mountains. Sent people, not soldiers. Mercenaries. Those who know how to slit a throat in the dark and leave until dawn. Danul stood at edge of the camp and thought. And he had 2 options. First, send warriors to meet them. 4 Gurdas against 4 people. The result is predictable. The Gurdis will crush them in minute. But someone can make it to get away. 1. Just 1. He will return to Anselm and tell everything he saw. Trebuchet, the blacksmith shop, camp, strength. Second option. Ambush. Not fight. Ambush. Danul closed his eyes. In front of him stood a choice which he feared between first day. He, a historian, he studied wars. He knew that war is not schemes on paper and not formulas on the board.
War is the dead people, and now he must had do so that 4 people to die. Not Gurdas, people. People as him, from that exactly kind, with hands and legs and eyes and mothers who are waiting them at home. He opened his eyes. He called out, Koran, and gave an order. The trail led through a narrow gorge. The walls were 20 meters with both sides. The bottom of the gorge is 10 steps. Don-Ul set up 2 guards upstairs, according to 1 with each side, with boulders. Not huge, medium-sized ones, about 200 kilograms. Enough. 2 put at the exit at the gorge. Wait. Do not attack. Wait. If someone passes through the rocks alive, then. The mercenaries entered into the gorge at sunset. The shadows were long and thick. They flowed carefully, professionally. They checked the corners. We listened carefully. But they looked straight ahead and in all around. Not up. People rarely look up. Don-Ul knew that. He had read about it at work on tactics mountain warfare. The eye gets used to the horizontal. The threat from above is not instinctive for humans. It is instinctive for birds. The first boulder fell exactly. The second fell to the left. 2 mercenaries were killed at once. The third jumped backward. He broke his leg on a rock. He was lying and screamed. The 4th rushed toward the exit out the gorge. He ran quickly, desperately, and ran out straight onto Gurda, which was standing behind the bend. Silence settled after 10 seconds. Don-Ul was at the edge of the gorge and looked down. 4 bodies. Small. According to Gurdian standards, like dolls, like toys. But it were people, living people 10 seconds ago. He felt nauseous. He turned away. He crouched on a rock. His hands were shaking. My knees were trembling. In my bowl was sour and bitter. A heavy cloud stood beside her. She didn't ask. She just stood there, huge, silent, like a mountain, just always. After 5 minutes, he stood up. He wiped his mouth and said it's cleaned the bodies so that no one would find it. The bodies were buried deeply. They were taken, crossbows, knives, chainmail shirts, small in Gurdian buy, but priceless. Don-Ul laid out his on a rock and examined it for 2 days. Crossbows were good, steel bows, walnut stock, tension with a crank. He knew this design. European crossbow of the 15th century or so. Draw of tension is about 150 kilograms. The Raven shot 150 steps. Pierces chainmail at 50. Against Gurdas in open field it was a weapon. Gurd is big, slow, target as big as a house. 10 crossbowmen could skewer 1 Gurd bolt in 30 seconds and kill him. Gurdian leather is tough, but not that much. Against an organized volley, it help. That's why human fortresses were impregnable to the Gurd. Walls, crossbows, organization. Don-Ul sat over crossbows and thought. Not about an attack, about defense. Gurdam needs armor, real armor. Not skins, not bark. Metal. Plate armor that will stop a bolt. But scale. Gurdam on average 7 meters. The area of body is 4 times than a human's. That means 4 times as much metal. 1 cuirass for a Gurd weighs as much as 4 human cuirasses, and there are 170 Gurds in the clan. Outfitting them all would require tons of iron. Impossible. For now.
But outfitting one is possible. Just one. 2 days after the ambush, Grumata returned from a reconnaissance mission on the southern slope. She had gone to check out the human outpost, that very one, with the tower and the palisade. She returned with a crossbow bolt lodged in her left shoulder, the second time in 2 years. The bolt had lodged deep. The tip had struck bone. Soyeon wasn't there yet. They treated her the old-fashioned way. Danul sat at her feet while the old Gurkha healer pulled the bolt out with bone forceps. Grumata didn't scream. She didn't moan. She just clenched her jaw so hard her teeth creaked. The sound was like stone against stone. When the bolt was pulled out, blood gushed forth. Thick, dark, smelling of iron and earth. The healer plugged the wound with moss and bound it with sinew. Grumata closed her eyes. Dan-ul looked at the wound, at the moss soaking with blood, at his adoptive mother's face. Gray, motionless, ancient. He saw 240 years flash before her closed eyes. 240 years of loss. A son killed by a crossbow bolt to the throat, and now a bolt in her own shoulder. The same enemy, the same weapon. Nothing had changed in 200 years. Nothing. Except for one thing. Now she had him. He stood up, went to his cave, sat down by the wall, took a piece of charcoal, and began to draw. Lamellaire armor. Not human-made. Human armor wouldn't work. Human armor consists of solid, forged plates fitted to the body. For a gird, such plates would be the size of a door. It's impossible to forge them. There's no forge big enough. There's no anvil wide enough. He was thinking of something else. Lamellaire armor. He knew this design. The Mongols, the Koreans, the Japanese. Small plates bound together in rows with cords. Each plate the size of a palm. Dozens of plates in a row. Dozens of rows in a suit of armor. The plates overlap each other like scales. A blow does not strike a single plate, but is distributed across several. A bolt cannot pierce it because it cannot push through 3 layers of metal at once. And most importantly, each plate is small. A Gurdian palm is the size of a human tray. A plate the size of a Gurdian palm is the size of a human tray. Taeyin can forge these, one at a time, day after day, plate after plate. He spent the whole night calculating. The surface area of a Grumat's body, roughly, chest, back, shoulders, thighs. Number of plates, about 600. Size of each, 20 by 15 centimeters. Thickness, 3 millimeters. The weight of each, about 700 grams. The total weight of the armor, 420 kilograms. Impossible for a human. A trifle for a gird. He sent a messenger to Taeyin. The message was long, with drawings, measurements, and explanations. She arrived 3 days later, with a hammer on her shoulder, and with her father. Tongar walked behind his daughter, not ahead of her, behind her. Danul noticed this and said nothing, but he understood. Tongar had acknowledged it, silently, in the gird way, by giving way to her. They worked for 3 months. Danul drew the plans. Taeyin forged the armor. Tongar brought the ore and coal and pumped the bellows. For his daughter. 600 plates, 20 a day, each one forged, punched with holes along the edges, smoothed. Inspected. Danul checked each one. He tapped it with a bone mallet. He listened to the ring. If the sound was clear, the plate was good. If it sounded hollow inside, it was defective. Taeyin would get angry when he rejected one. Each plate took an hour of work.
But then she'd come back the next day with a new one. Better, cleaner, with a clearer ring. She learned quickly, faster than he'd expected. When all 600 plates were ready, they began assembling them. Donald showed them how to lace it together. Leather cords through the holes, plate to plate, row to row, overlapping, from the bottom up, so the bolt would slide along the surface and not catch on the edge. A quilted under armor made of 3 layers of leather, then the lamellar armor, then the shoulder guards. Each shoulder guard bore the ancestral emblem of the Greystone clan. Donald carved the emblem himself, on every plate of the shoulder guard, a small emblem, a gray stone. 20 years ago, he couldn't even fix a faucet in the bathroom. Now he was cutting through metal. Crooked, rough, but he did it himself. Grumata stood before the campfire in her finished armor. Evening, sunset. The fire danced across the plates. The quilted surcoat fit snugly around her body. The lamellar armor covered her chest, back, and thighs. The shoulder guards sat straight. The clan crest gleamed. 8 meters. Gray skin and gray iron. She looked like a statue, like a monument, like something eternal and indestructible. The clan was silent. All 170 gird stood and watched, and remained silent. Then one old gird woman, the very one who had carved the bone needles, the one who had helped Don Ul with the fastenings, she stepped forward. She looked at Grumata in her armor. She looked at Don Ul, and she spoke softly, in a voice that made the air tremble, not the earth. The boy did what was right for his mother. Grumata didn't say a word. She sank to one knee, slowly. The earth trembled beneath her weight. She found herself face to face with Don Ul. Her eyes, yellow, wet. Wet for the first time in 200 years. She reached out and gently touched his cheek with her fingertip. The finger was as big as his forearm, and it was warm, as always. She said nothing. She didn't need to. Anselm de Vries was sitting in his office in Fort Streletsky Click and read reports. The fort stood at the foot of the mountains, a stone tower, palisade, barracks for 40 soldiers, stable, storage shed. Everything is neat, everything in the bylaws. Anselm was 52 years old, thin, gray-haired, straight back, hands with long fingers that never did tremble, eyes gray and calm like a lake. He was drinking wine from silver cup and red. 4 mercenaries didn't return. A month and a half, 2. The contract provided for a report every 2 weeks. 3 missed deadlines. So dead. He wasn't angry. Anger is an emotion. Emotions get in the way of work. He noted the fact in the journal. 4 were lost. I put the date, closed the journal, opened another one. Sales entries. Caravans that traveled to the mountains with iron and salt returned with hides and bones and mountain honey. Half-breed merchants. People from Gurdian with blood through 3 or 4 generations. Below in then pure people, but everything still people. They knew the trails. They the language. They knew the customs. And they knew count coins. Anselm paid them for information. A little. A silver coin for a rumor, a gold for fact. Facts were alarming. The clan Greystone, a stranger child, a human, or almost a human. He says strange things. He comes up with strange things. The Gurds listen him. Anselm reread the notes. The little boy who knocked over the tree, the kid who moved a rock, the little boy who built the car that throws rocks. Rumors. Maybe it's exaggerations. Merchants like embellish for gold coin. But 4 mercenaries did not return. That is not a rumor. It's fact. He wrote a letter to Capital, the Wallen, office of the council. He wrote dryly, without emotion, without judgment, just facts. Recommendation: strengthen monitoring of the northern mountains. It may be possible to speed up preparation for the hike. The answer came in 2 months. Polite, cold. The trip is planned in 18 years, by the age of majority of the heir. Time frames are not negotiable. The recommendation adopted for noted. Anselm has read the reply. He put it away neatly, put it in the drawer, and sent to the mountains a second group. 6 of them, not mercenaries, soldiers, scouts from the Imperial Corps, professionals. They did not return either. Danul to that B had set up the system. It complicated, but effective. 3 lines patrols in the southern slope, the outer line, observers on the summits, 1 gird on each peak. 5 peaks. The problem is simple. Look down. If you see people who are up, light a bonfire. 1 campfire means not people. 2 bonfires means a lot. 3 bonfires means an army. A middle line. Pairs of on the trails. 2 gurdas on each path. 4 paths. Problem: if an observer lit a campfire, set out toward the trail and wait. Do not attack. Wait. Inner line. Ambush units. By 4 gurdas. In narrow places, in gorges, on mountain passes, there where the trails narrow and the walls rise on sides. Problem: if the lookouts confirmed that strangers are coming, then. A simple system, 3 lines. 15 gurd are in use at all times. For clan in 170, that's quite a lot. But Danul convinced the council. He said 1 phrase that settled the argument. A dead hunter will not bring meat. A living. A sentry will save 10 hunters. Brookmar objected. Of course objected. 15 warriors are sitting on rocks instead of that of hunt? Stupidity. Cowardice. The path of our ancestors is to face the enemy head on. To face, with my chest to chest. Don't hide behind rocks like a lizard. Danul didn't argue. He turned toward the Koran. To him, the scout whom was with crossbows. Koran stood up. He pointed to his shoulder, the scar from the bolt, white to gray leather. Then pointed to his thigh, the second scar. And he said 1 sentence. I walked alone. If we there too, the second saw would an ambush. The council fell silent. Brookmar sat down. No, because that he agreed. But that argue with a wounded warrior about wounds, it not allowed, even by the path of our ancestors. The system worked. The second group, Anselm's, ended up into ambush at the 3 winds. 6 soldiers, well armed, with experience in warfare. They have the line at night, but the observer saw them at dawn when they were resting by the stream. 1 campfire. Lookouts on the trail confirmed it. 6 people. Armed. They're up. An ambush team has taken a position in the gorge, 1 hour and a half hours before that than the soldiers entered there. Boulders from above. How in last time. But this time, Danul added a detail. He ordered 1 guard to stand at the entrance at the gorge. Open. Visible. The soldiers saw him and stopped. 1 gird. 1. They could have with 1. 6 crossbows. Reload 10 seconds. 2 volley, and gird is dead. They raised their crossbows. They took aim, and as they looked ahead, boulders fell from above. Danul was standing at the edge of the gorge and listened. The cries were short, then silence. His didn't feel in this time, and it scared him even the nausea. He was getting used to it. It to get used to it. He returned to camp. He sat in his cave. For a long time stared at the wall, at the drawings, at diagrams, on numbers. And I thought about that Rodrigo de Almanzor is also probably started with ambushes. Likely, probably told to that this was necessary, that this for survival, that other way, and then burned 3 cities. Danuel stood up. He picked up a coal and wrote on the wall of the cave, in big letters, so that he sees her every time she comes in. You're not Rodrigo. Tayin came a week later, not with a hammer, with a question. She sat down across from him by the fire, 6.5 meters away. Red braids, soot on her hands, always soot. She asked why you don't make weapons. He looked at her. She continued. The machine throws stones. That's good. The armor protects. That's good. But the warriors have no weapons. They fight with sticks and fists. Human swords are too small. Give me the measurements. I'll forge them.
Daniel was silent. He was thinking. She was right. The Gurds fought primitively, with uprooted trees, boulders, fists. Against humans in an open field, it worked. A single punch from a fist the size of an anvil would turn a knight in full armor into a pancake. But that meant close combat, and close combat with crossbowmen behind the walls was suicide. He needed something else. Not swords, not spears, not the kind of weapons that would force the Gurd to scale the walls. He needed weapons that would keep them from scaling the walls at all. He told Tayin, no, not weapons. Tools. She frowned. What kind of tools? She asked. He began to list them. Shovels. Large ones. Gurd-sized. For digging. Pickaxes. For stone. Wedges. For splitting. Chains. Long ones. For hauling logs. Staples. For fastening frames. Hinges. For gates. Axles. For wheels. She listened. Her expression changed. From disappointment to understanding. From understanding to excitement. He's not building an army, she said. He is building one, she began, but didn't finish. But he could see that she understood. He isn't building it to kill. He's building it so that killing won't be necessary. A trebuchet hurls a stone over the wall. The wall falls. The garrison surrenders. Not a single guard climbs the wall under the crossbows. Not a single guard dies in close combat. Not a single person in the garrison dies if they surrender in time. Machines instead of muscles. Engineering instead of heroism. She was silent for a minute. Then she stood up. She raised her hammer. Tools, she said. They'll come. She left. Danuel watched her go. 6.5 meters, red braids, a hammer on her shoulder. She was walking back to the forge, to the fire, to the iron. And there was something new in her gait, not just determination, a purpose. She was no longer forging to prove she could. She was forging to build a future. Anselm sent a third group 3 months later, 12 people, with a half-blood guide who knew the mountains. They skirted the southern slope. They approached from the east, through the territory of the Blue Moss. Danuela's lookouts were stationed on the southern slope. The eastern side was unguarded. He hadn't expected it. That was his first mistake. The group crossed the Blue Moss Pass unnoticed. They were 2 hours from the Greystone camp when a Blue Moss hunting party spotted them, by chance.
3 Gurdas were returning from a hunt and saw the tracks. Human, fresh, 12 pairs of feet. They followed the tracks. They found the camp. 12 people were sleeping in a hollow, armed, with crossbows, with ropes and hooks, with strange little glass bottles. Poison. The 3 Gurd from Blue Moss did what any Gurd would have done. They attacked, head on, no ambush, no plan. They just jumped down from above. 2 people were crushed instantly. The rest sprang to their feet. Crossbows, a volley. 1 Gurd fell with 3 bolts in his chest. A second volley. The second Gurd fell. The third took off running. He ran for 2 hours, with a bolt in his thigh, bleeding out. He ran all the way to the Greystone camp and collapsed by the fire. Don Ull stood over him. The Gurd was from Blue Moss, a foreign clan, not his own. But he had run here, not to his own people, to Don Ull, because he knew that the Greystone boy knew what to do. The Gurd said 3 words before he lost consciousness. People. 12. East. Don Ull raised his head. He looked east, then at Grumata. She was already standing there, in armor, in that very lamellar armor made of 600 plates. She didn't wait for an order. She knew. 20 warriors set out an hour later, Grumata at the head, in armor. They moved quickly, fast by Gurd standards. A human runner could have outrun them, but they didn't stop. 8 hours without a break, across the pass, through the forest, following the tracks. They found Anselm's group at dawn. The 10 remaining men were heading east, quickly. They realized that the wounded Gurd had escaped and that others would soon arrive. They were in a hurry. But the Gurds had been marching all night, and they caught up. Don Ull didn't take part. He stayed at the camp. He sat by the wounded Gurd from Blue Moss and changed his bandages. Moss and fat and strips of leather. That was all they had. The Gurd survived. Anselm's group did not. When the warriors returned, Don Ull went out to meet them. He looked at Grumat, at her armor. Not a single dent, not a single scratch. The crossbows hadn't fired. The men hadn't had time. 20 Gurds against 10 men in an open field. It wasn't a battle. It was arithmetic. He wasn't rejoicing. He was thinking. Anselm had sent 12 from the east. That meant he was thinking. That meant he was looking for weak spots. That meant the next group would be even larger. Or even more cunning. Or both. They needed to secure the east. We need to expand the patrol system. We need Blue Moss. Not just trade, not just ore in exchange for iron. An alliance. A real one. A military one. He went to Grumate. She was sitting by the fire, taking off her armor, plate by plate. He sat down beside her. "We need Blue Moss," he said. She nodded. "I know," she said. Negotiations with Blue Moss took 3 councils. Each council lasted a whole day. Gurdas didn't did in a hurry. Never did in a hurry. Little the old chief sat by his campfire and listened. Grumata spoke. Don Ull sat next and remained silent. The first piece of advice was about the dead. 2 Gurdas Blue Moss were killed by crossbow bolts. Young ones. Hunters. One had a wife and 2 children. Crochan listed their names. Slowly, with pauses. Each name is a stone placed on a grave. Grumata replied with the names of dead, those who perished at the people in the past 10 years. 4. Names. Pauses. Stones on the graves. That was a ritual, not negotiations. Before them speak about future, we need to honor the past. Daniel was sitting and listened the names. Each name is Gerd to whom he didn't know, whom he would see, who died because that the world is that the big, slow creatures are losing to the small, fast creatures with crossbows. The second piece of advice was about the present. Grumata told about the system of patrols, about the principles, about that how groups have come to the mountains more often. She didn't mention Danula. She say who came up with the patrols, who organized ambushes. She said, us, the part of the Greystone. We set up an ambush. We secured the trails. Daniel understood. She was it on purpose. If she says that the little stranger is in the clans for the Croshan will shut itself off. The little tyrant. Again, little man is leading the guards. No, it must be clan, not boy, a clan. Croshan listened. He nodded. He asked questions. How many people came? How? What weapons? How often? From where? He was old, but his mind was sharp. He thought, and his arithmetic matched with Daniel's arithmetic. People are coming more often. The groups are larger. The weapons are better. These aren't traders. These aren't random bands. This is reconnaissance. And after reconnaissance comes the army. The third piece of advice was about the future. Grumata proposed an alliance. Not a trade alliance, a military one. Joint patrols, joint ambush positions, a joint alarm signal. If the enemy approaches from the east, Blue Moss lights the fires and Greystone comes to the rescue. If from the south, Greystone lights the fires and Blue Moss comes. Croshan was silent for a long time, a very long time, about 20 minutes. No one moved. Then he asked, and the stream? Grumata looked at Don Ull, a quick glance, a brief one, but Don Ull saw a question in it. She was asking him. He nodded slightly. She turned to Croshan. The stream is yours, she said. Silence. The stream because of which the two clans had not spoken for 3 generations. The stream that was a symbol of pride and stubbornness and old grudges. Yours. One word. Croshan looked at her, for a long time. Then he nodded, slowly, once. Alliance, he said. Don Ull exhaled, quietly, so that no one would notice. An alliance of 2 clans out of 9. 270 guards instead of 170. A territory twice as large, and Tongar's forge as part of the alliance. Not in exchange, as part of it. Iron is now a shared resource. A week later, Don Ull stood at the pass between the 2 clans' territories and looked east. Behind him stood 4 men, 2 sentries from Greystone, 2 sentries from Blue Moss. The first mixed shift. They didn't know each other. They were silent. They eyed each other warily. But they stood side by side, on the same pass, looking in the same direction. That was the beginning. He was 13 when Aurelia arrived. She didn't come on her own. She was brought here. A trade caravan from the foothills. 3 mules, 2 half-breed merchants, and with them a girl, human, petite, 1.60 meters, red-haired, thin, with bruises on her wrists. The merchants brought her as merchandise. Anselm de Vries owed them for 3 caravans. To settle the debt, he handed over his secretary, a girl he'd bought from her merchant father 3 years ago to pay off her father's debts. The merchants didn't know what to do with her. She couldn't carry bundles, she couldn't cook, she couldn't do anything a caravan needed. But she spoke Gerd, fluently. With an accent, but fluently. 3 years at Anselm's trading post. 3 years listening to merchants, prisoners, and defectors. She learned the language, and she knew things. The merchants brought her to the Council of the Bonfire and offered her as an interpreter. For 10 mountain goat hides. Don-Ul sat on his rock and looked at her. Small, among giants, like him, but different. She wasn't a child. She was 22, and there was no fear in her eyes. There was anger. Quiet, steady, familiar. The anger of a person who had long since stopped being afraid because there was nothing left to fear. Everything bad had already happened. Grumata looked down at her. 8 meters by 1 meter 60. Small, she said. Like my son. It wasn't tenderness. It was an observation. Don-Ul climbed down from his rock. He approached her. They stood side by side. He was a head taller than her. He was 13. She was 22. But he looked older, stronger, broader. His body was growing faster than a human's. He spoke to her, in the human language, the one she knew. She flinched. Her eyes widened. She hadn't expected to hear human speech here, in the mountains, from a boy among giants. "Who are you?" she asked. He answered simply, "Don-Ul, Greystone." She looked at him for a long time. Then she reached into her bosom, pulled out a scroll, parchment, crumpled, tied with a string. She handed it to him. He unrolled it. A map, detailed, with routes, with dates, with notes in the imperial language, the route of the planned mountain expedition. 3 columns. The southern column through the Strelitz Fang Pass, the eastern column through the Blue Moss Valley, the northern column taking a detour around the Bone Ridge. Dates, troop strength, composition, supply train. 200,000 spears in 15 years. She said quietly, so that only he could hear, "I can't keep this in my head any longer. Take it." He looked at the map. His hands didn't tremble. His mind was working. 200,000. 3 columns. 15 years. It was worse than he'd thought. And better. Worse because of the scale. 200,000 spears is 10 to 1 against all the gird. Better because of the 15 years. 15 years to prepare. He rolled up the map, tucked it into his shirt, looked at Aurelia. "You'll stay," he said. Not a question, a statement. She nodded. "Of course I'll stay," she replied.
"I have nowhere else to go." He set up an office for her, a small one, in the corner of the command cave. The ceiling was 2.5 meters high, a desk made of flat stone resting on supports, a chair made from a log stump. She sat down at the desk and placed her hands on the stone. Cool, smooth. Her hands, small, with bruises on her wrists that were just beginning to turn yellow. She sat there in silence, for a long time. Then she looked at Danila, who was standing in the doorway. "Is this my table?" she asked. "It's yours," he replied. She turned away toward the wall. He saw her shoulders tremble, just once. She wasn't crying. She had forgotten how to cry 3 years ago, but her shoulders trembled. He left, quietly. He let her be alone. For the first time in 3 years, she had a place that belonged to her, not to the master, not to the trading post, not to the caravan, to her. 2.5 meters of ceiling, a stone table, a wooden chair, and silence. The map changed everything. Daniel spent over her 3 days almost without sleep. He laid out her on the floor of the cave. He pinned with pebbles in the corners and crawled across it on me with a piece of coal in hand. I was notes. I was counting. 3 columns. South. Main assault force. 80,000 infantry. 20,000 cavalry. A siege supply train. Battering rams.
ballistas. 40 engineers from the Imperial School. Route across the Strzelecki Klika Pass, straight through the territory of Seristone. Eastern. 50,000 infantry, light cavalry, without siege supply train. The objective is to cut off the eastern clans from the western ones. Route through the blue MKH. North. 30,000, mountain arrows, light infantry. The objective to enter from the rear. Through the Bone Ridge, where no one is waiting, where there are guards, where there are clans. Only stone and snow and wind. 200,000, against 40,000 Gerd scattered across 9 clans which do not know fight together. Those don't know what a structure. Those resolve disputes in a duel and consider an ambush cowardice. Aurelia was sitting behind her table and translating notes onto the map. Imperial language was complex, with abbreviations, with codes. She knew them because that 3 years I've been such documents for Anselm. Here she said, pointing at a spot south of the pass.
Equipment for equipment. Anselm is setting up it already 2 years, stone and wood. 3 barracks, stable on 500 horses, also empty. But it's under construction. Here, second point, the road. They are widening the mountain road. They are cutting down the forest. They are building bridges so that caravans can pass through. Here, third, wells, watering hole on the route, every 20 kilometers. For the army on the water is life. Without water, 200,000 will die in week. Danuel nodded. He knew that. Logistics. His specialty. No swords and arrows decide wars. Supply trains and wells decide wars. Napoleon did not lose to Russia because of Russian soldiers. He lost her because of thousands kilometers of roads and burned down warehouses. He asked Aurelius, "Who is in command of the southern column?" She replied, "The heir, Prince Marcel de Wallon. 20 years, 15 years. The boy now, 5 years old. He's playing with toy soldiers. But 15 years, he will be a 20-year-old prince who wants to become king through fame. And this is war. And war is heads of them on spears in front of the gates of the capital." Danuel stood up. He approached toward exit of cave. He looked at mountains. Morning. The sun was rising from behind the ridges, golden light on gray rocks. Beautiful. Quiet. Peaceful. 15 years from these paths will 80,000, with siege towers and battering rams and crossbows and fire. 15 years, he thought. I, 13. When they come, I will be 28. Gurdam, I will still young. People already grown up. It's enough. Is enough. He returned to map. No, that's enough. If he will work alone, with 2 clans out of 9, he needs all of them. All 9. 40,000 Gurd. United, armed, trained, with fortresses and vehicles and discipline, with which by them never had, for 15 years. He began to plan. Aurelia helped. She knew people. She knew how the army. She knew the ranks and structure and he knew the guards. He knew the clans. He knew the chiefs. He knew who with whom was, and because of, they worked together, at night, on maps, over lists, over calculations. He sat at floor, because that the chair was her against knee. She sat at table. He was looking at the card from below, it from the top down, and they were talking, quietly. So not wake up the camp. Human and Gurdiane. 2 languages in one conversation. Sometimes words got mixed up.
He began a phrase in Gurdian and ended in human, it the opposite, and both knew it. He noticed that she had stopped shudder when he approached from behind. On third week. What I stopped hide my under her clothes. Fifth. She started sleeping with the door closed instead of open. Seventh. Little things, invisible, but he saw them, because he was watching. He made her a chess set, out of pebbles, white ones made of quartz, black ones made of obsidian. The board was made of flat slate marked with charcoal. The pieces were makeshift, pebbles of various sizes and shapes. She looked at the board, then at him. "Do you know how to play chess?" she asked. He nodded. "Where did you learn?" she asked. "From another life," he replied. She didn't ask any further. She understood that there were things he wouldn't tell her, and she accepted it, just as one accepts the weather. No hard feelings, no questions. They played every evening, after working on the maps, in silence, move by move, the clack of a piece against the slate. She played well, aggressively, sacrificing pieces for the sake of an attack. He played cautiously, building a defense, waiting for a mistake. She won more often. He didn't mind. Between games they talked, about her, bit by bit, drop by drop. Her father was a merchant. Her mother died young. Her father drank. Debts. The trading post sold her to settle the debt. 3 years with Anselm. She didn't go into details. He didn't ask. But he heard what she didn't say, in the pauses, in the way she averted her eyes, in the way her fingers clenched around the pebble when she was thinking. She told him one thing. Anselm didn't hit her. Never. He was polite. Always. He poured her wine. He said please and thank you. And that was worse than the beatings. Because you can hate the beatings. But the politeness that keeps you in a cage can't even be named. There's no word for a prison where the jailer smiles. Don Ull listened. He was silent. He didn't offer comfort. He didn't say everything would be all right. Because he didn't know. Maybe it would. Maybe it wouldn't. He said only one thing. Here, you're not property. Here, you're a worker. A worker has a desk and a chair and a door that can be closed. She looked at him. "You're 13, she said. "Yes," he replied. "And you talk like an old man." He smiled. "You're not the first to notice that," he replied. She didn't smile, but something in her face shifted, like a stone that had shifted from its place. Just a little, by a millimeter, but it moved. He was 14 when he began uniting the clans, not by force, not by threats, by demonstration. He invited the leaders of the 3 nearest clans, Red Scree, Whitebone, and Black Moss, through merchants and messengers, through Croshan, whom everyone respected. The message was simple. Come to Greystone. We'll show you something. 2 out of 3 came. Red Scree and Whitebone. Black Moss refused. Their chieftain, Grumtan, didn't trust Greystone, an old feud over hunting grounds from 30 years ago. Danul wasn't upset. 2 out of 3 is good, for a start. He showed them the trebuchet, loaded it, fired it. A 100-kilogram stone flew 400 paces, a crater in the hillside. They were silent. Then he showed them the onager, small, fast, fires 20-kilogram stones. Not far, 200 paces, but fast. Reload time, 3 minutes. 5 shots per hour. They remained silent. Then he showed them Gru Mata in her armor. She stood before them, 8 meters tall in lamellar armor. The plates glinted in the sun, shoulder guards bearing the clan crest. She looked like a god of war. Craigmall, chieftain of the Red Scree, stood up. He was short for a Gerd, 6 meters tall, but sinewy and quick. His clan lived on the eastern slope and encountered human patrols more often than any other. He had lost 8 warriors over the past 5 years. Crossbow bolts, every single time. He approached Grewmate. He touched a plate, tapped it with his knuckle. A ringing sound, clear, metallic. He turned to Dan-Ul. "How much?" he asked. Dan-Ul understood the question. "Not how much it costs, how many it takes to make one like this for my people," he replied. 600 plates for 1 suit of armor. Tay-In forges 20 a day. 30 days for 1 suit. He fell silent. Then he added, "If your people provide the ore, and provide apprentices for Tay-In, she'll teach them. In a year, she won't be the only one forging. In 2 years, we'll have 10 blacksmiths. In 5 years, 100 sets of armor." Craigmall looked at him, at the 14-year-old human boy standing among the giants, proposing things that hadn't existed in the entire 1,000 years of Gerd history. He nodded. Once. Slowly. "We'll provide the ore," he said. Ashtar, the white-bone chieftain, was more cautious. An old woman, 280 years old, 7 meters tall, gray braids, cloudy eyes, but a sharp mind. She didn't nod. She asked, "What do you want in return?" Dan-Ul answered without hesitation. He had been preparing for this question. "Nothing," he said. "Ore in exchange for armor, knowledge in exchange for students, an alliance in exchange for safety." She shook her head. "It doesn't work that way," she said. "There's always a price." He looked her in the eyes. "The price has already been paid," he replied. "With your dead. With my dead. Every Gerd killed by a crossbow bolt is the price we pay for still being divided." Ashtar was silent. For a long time. Then she nodded. Once. But more slowly than Craigmole. More cautiously. With a caveat. "I'll see," she said. "For now, I'll just see." Dan-Ul accepted that. For now, that's enough. 4 clans out of 9. Greystone, Blue Moss, Red Scree, Whitebone on probation. It's not yet the Union of Fires, but it's no longer just one clan. It's already something. Tehim was 15 when he met Rahan. The sentinels from the eastern pass brought her to at dawn. She walked alone, not a captive, not a guest, a fugitive. 7 meters, slightly browned, unusually flickering for Gerdki. Narrow shoulders, long legs, skin lighter than that most people, almost ash blonde. She stood before the council bonfire and remained silent, her eyes downcast. Her hands hang at the body, the bunts of a dog. Dan-Ul looked at her with his rock and saw that others didn't. Not a beaten-up dog, a she-wolf, who is used to lower her eyes because that's they hit less often. The Quran explained, she is the red Ossipi Ra-Khan, daughter warrior, but not a warrior, too light, too weak. In the first she was losing everyone, even the teenagers. Gerdian culture did not know how to do with the warrior who can't fight. They chased her away, from all sides. She hunting because it was too easy to knock over a deer. With training since because she loses. From parking lot that because mouth extra and no. She left on her own, at night, without food, without weapons. It was 4 days toward west, toward Greystone. That's that I heard about the little boy who does strange things, who takes those who others don't accept. Don Ull went down from rock. He walked over to her. She was twice than his. He tilted his head to look her at face. "Show your," he said. She stretched out her arms, her palms up. He watched. Narrow for humps, long fingers, thin in Gerdian standards, calluses from rocks but not from a club. "Show your," he said. She lifted her foot. Her foot. Narrow, long, with firm sole. Foot of who walks on rocks. He nodded. "Go," he said. "From here to that tree and back." She went, and he saw. Everyone saw it, but only he understood. She walked silently. The gourds were heavy. With every step is a blow. The ground shakes, the stones creak, branches snap. Rahan was walking like a shadow. Her feet fell on the ground softly, exactly. She instinctively chose a stone and not the ground, a hard and not soft. That's that hard doesn't crunch. Don Ull turned toward the council. "She did not warrior," he said. "She's eyes." Silence. "What are eyes?" he asked one of the elders. Don Ull replied, "In army which he is building there, the who hits. And there are those who watch, those who sees the enemy first, those who is at the head of the army, and returns from that he saw. The scout, the eyes of the army. Without eyes, an army is blind. A blind army, dead army." He turned toward Rahan. "Are you wot quieter than any Gerd whom I have ever seen? You light, you fast. You can walk through mountains 4 days without food. That is not a weakness. It's a weapon." She looked at him, from above to bottom. He was her up waist, a boy man, 14 years old. And he said to that, "She isn't useless. She's needed." What they drove her toward is exactly what she was created for. Something broke in her eyes. Quiet, like ice in spring. She sank to one knee, not out of submission, because her legs could no longer hold her up. He held out his hand. She could have wrapped 2 fingers around his palm, but she took it, gently, like catching a bird. "Stand up," he said. "Stand up and follow me. I'll show you what you'll be doing." He began training her that very day, not in combat, in observation. How to determine the number of people from their tracks.
How to tell how long ago a fire was lit by the ashes.
How to listen to the mountains. Echoes, the wind, rockfalls. Every sound carries information. You just have to know how to listen. She learned eagerly, like a starving person. Every morning she went out to train. Every evening she returned and told him what she had seen. A herd of goats in the southern gorge, 6 of them, heading east. Bear tracks by the upper stream, old ones, 3 days old. Smoke to the south, beyond the ridge. Not Gerdian, human. Human smoke is thinner because people burn less firewood. Don Ull listened and nodded, and gave her new assignments. Go to the 3 Winds Pass, count all the trails, count all the places where you can hide a lookout. Come back and draw a map. She drew, with charcoal on stone, crooked, rough, but accurate, every turn in the trail, every rock behind which one could take cover, every cliff, every water source. He looked at her maps and saw a scout, a real one, a natural. A month later he gave her her first real assignment, to go down the southern slope, below the patrol line, to the very edge of the foothills, and to look at the human outpost, that very one, with the tower and the palisade. Don't attack, don't get close, just look. Count the people, the weapons, the horses, the mules, the carts. Return. She left at dawn. She returned 3 days later, without a single scratch, without a single trace. The guards at the outpost didn't even notice that a 7-meter-tall Gurkha was lying in a crevice 400 paces from their tower, counting crossbows. 23 soldiers, 8 horses, 2 mules, 1 wagon with barrels, probably water or oil, 17 crossbows, 3 in the tower, the rest in the barracks, a double palisade, a single gate, locked from the inside. Don Ull listened. Then he took out her map of the pass. He placed it next to the sketch of the outpost and showed it to the council. "This is what our eyes see," he said. "This is what our enemies don't know, what we see." Rahan stood to the side. She wasn't part of the council. Not an elder, not a warrior, not even a clan member. A fugitive. But everyone was looking at her map, at her sketch, at what she had brought from beyond the line. Craigmole, the chief of Redscree, the clan she had fled from, stood among the guests. He had come to this council because an alliance was being discussed. He looked at Rahan, the girl his clan had cast out as useless, who now stood before the council of another clan, revealing information no one else possessed. He said nothing, but Donul saw his jaw clench. Not out of anger, out of shame. A week later, Donul began building a signaling system. Not bonfires. Bonfires are too slow. By the time you've lit one, they'll already have seen it. Mirrors. Bronze discs polished to a shine. Tayin forged 5 of them in a week. Each disc was the size of a Gurdian palm. The principle was simple. Sunlight reflected off the polished bronze was visible for kilometers. 2 mirrors on 2 peaks. 1 glare meant, "I see you." 2 glares meant danger. 3 meant, "I'm coming to you." He placed the mirrors along the ridge. 5 points. A chain stretching from the southern pass to the camp. The signal traveled from end to end in 10 minutes. Before, a messenger would have had to run for half a day. Rahan became the master of the system. She taught the others. She showed them how to capture the sun's light, how to maintain the angle, how to distinguish a mirror's glare from a random reflection. For the first time in her life, she was teaching. For the first time, others listened to her. Not out of pity, out of necessity. She knew what they didn't know, and that knowledge was valuable. Don Ull watched. He saw how she was changing, how her shoulders straightened, how her chin lifted, how her voice went from soft to steady. Not loud. Rahan would never be loud. But steady, confident. The voice of someone who knows her place. Not because she was put there, because she found it herself. One evening she approached him by the campfire. She sat down beside him, huge next to him, 7 meters next to 1.5. She was silent for a long time. Then she said, "Thank you." He shook his head. "Don't," he said. "I need you. This isn't charity, it's work." She looked at him. "You always talk like that," she asked. "How?" "So that it's not embarrassing to accept." He didn't answer. She fell silent, too. They sat by the campfire, the little one and the big one. The fire crackled. The embers glowed. Somewhere down below in the valleys, people were building a road for the army that would arrive in 15 years. And here in the mountains, a boy-man was building something else. Not an army, not a fortress, not a machine. He was building a people. From the broken, the outcasts, and the forgotten, from the blacksmith who was denied a hammer, from a scout whom they deemed useless, from a salesgirl who was denied a counter. One by one, person by person, gird by gird, he was building a people who, in 15 years, would stand in the path of a 200,000-strong army and hold their ground. If he didn't make a mistake, if he made it in time, if Brookmar didn't kill him first. He was 17 when Soyon, the caravan from the eastern foothills, brought not just salt and iron ingots. He brought a woman, a little one, human, with black hair and a scar from his left temple to the chin, a thin white scar across face, like a crack on porcelain. She stood by a caravan with her hands and silently stared at the ground. A half-breed merchant approached to Don Ulu and said that he had found her at the market in Faldena, human town in 3 days' journey to south, the slave market. She cost 12 silver. That's for a living person. That's that in her a scar. Because that she from the east. Because that she killed the guard who was trying to arrest her. They arm for that. It healed crooked. My left hand does not extend all the way fully. The merchant bought it because that he had heard that Don Ul is looking for people, anyone, with skills. She was a military medic. Because of the sea, from principalities of Hanso, the war in East ended 3 years ago. The losing side was into slavery. All of them. Soldiers, doctors, women, children. She treated the wounded on battlefield, both sides, without discrimination. For this her considered a traitor. Strangers did, too. The army took it into captivity and forced sort the wounded. Those who could be saved to the right, those who cannot to the left. Left meant a knife under the ribs. To they suffer. She was sorting for 2 years. She made an oath not kill. And 2 years, every day, I sent people to there with a wave of the hand, to the right, to the left, right, left. Don Ul stood in front of her. He untied the ropes himself, with his thick, clumsy fingers. He fiddled with the knot. She stood and waited. She moved. She didn't help. It was if it didn't care. The ropes fell. On wrists remained red stripes. He looked into eyes, dark, empty. The eyes of a man who had turned something off inside himself and forgotten where the switch was. He said, "With me, you'll treat everyone they bring in. Gerdov, people, ours, strangers. That's my condition." Silence. She looked at him. A boy, a man, among giants, with thick fingers and calm eyes. He had just said the words she'd been waiting to hear for 3 years. Everyone. No sorting. No knife. Just treat them. She began to cry. Silently, without a grimace, just tears, down both cheeks, down her scar. She stood upright and cried, not hiding her face, for the first time in 5 years. Donald didn't touch her. He didn't comfort her. He didn't say everything would be all right. He just stood beside her and waited for her to finish. Then he led her to a cave on the eastern side of the camp. He'd been preparing for this in advance. When he heard from the merchants that there was a healer from the east at the slave market in Falden, he sent for her, on purpose, because he needed a healer, because the Gerd treated their wounds with moss and fat, and half the wounded died of infection. Because an army without healers isn't an army, it's a meat grinder. The cave was small, tiny by Gerd standards. The ceiling was 3 meters high, the walls were plastered with clay, the floor was paved with flat stones, clean, dry. 2 windows in the wall, facing east. He had chiseled them out himself, with the help of his students. They'd been chiseling away at the stone for 3 days. She stepped inside. She paused. She looked at the windows. Through them she could see a mountain ridge, and far, far beyond it, a strip of sky that turned pink in the morning. Not the sea, but the sky. "Why east?" she asked quietly. "You said you missed the sea," he said. She hadn't said that. She couldn't speak. They'd only just met. He'd heard it from the merchant. The merchant had mentioned it in passing. A girl from the east. She's always looking east. She must miss it. Don Ul remembered, and he chiseled 2 windows into the rock. So-yeon stood by the window. She looked toward the east. She was silent. Then she turned to him. "What do you want from me?" she asked. "I already told you," he replied. "Heal everyone." She nodded, and she began working that very day. Gurdian anatomy differed from human anatomy. The bones were thicker, the skin was thicker, the blood was thicker, the internal organs were arranged slightly differently. The heart was in the center, not on the left. The liver was enormous. The lungs took up 2/3 of the ribcage. So-yeon studied. She dissected the bodies of dead animals. She compared them. She took notes. With charcoal on her skin, because there was no paper. She found a healer, that old Gerd woman who treated people with moss and fat. They didn't understand each other. So-yeon didn't speak Gerd. The healer didn't speak any human language. But they both knew plants. The healer showed her herbs. So-yeon sniffed them. She tasted them on her tongue. She nodded or shook her head. A month later, they had put together a medicine cabinet. 23 mountain plants with medicinal properties. Antiseptics, pain relievers, fever reducers, and hemostatics. So-yeon dried them, tied them into bundles, and hung them on the walls of the cave hospital. The smell was thick and bitter, just like in a pharmacy, just like home. She smiled for the first time in 2 months. Don-ul saw it, in passing. She was standing by the wall, sorting through the dried herbs and humming something softly. The song was in the Hanso language. He didn't understand the words, but the melody was warm, calm. A lullaby, perhaps. She didn't see him. He left quietly. He didn't want to disturb her. He was 17. The Wallen army would arrive in 13 years, and he had a medic. The first real medic in the history of the Gerd. Don-ul asked So-yeon for one thing, not to treat, but to teach. He brought 6 young Gerd men to her, big ones, strong, with huge hands. So-yeon looked up at them. She came up to their knees. She had to teach them how to bandage wounds, stop bleeding, and set bones. Their fingers were as thick as her hand. She began, patiently, calmly, demonstrating on herself. "Here's the artery. Press down, not too hard. Don't crush it. Press down." The Gerd pressed down. So-yeon winced, too hard. Again, gently, even more gently. That's it. 6 months later, she had 6 assistants. Clumsy, slow, but trained in the basics. They could bandage a wound, stop the bleeding, apply a splint, not kill the patient during transport. That was more than the Gerd had ever managed. Don-ul asked So-yeon for one more thing. Anatomy, human anatomy. He brought Rahan and 4 warriors to her, and he asked So-yeon to show them where a person's vulnerable spots were. Not to kill, to immobilize. The tendons below the knee. Cut them, and the person won't be able to stand, but they'll live. The shoulder joint. Dislocate it, and the arm won't work, but it will heal. The solar plexus. A blow there, and the person can't breathe for a minute, but then they'll breathe again. So-yeon listened to his explanation. "Why?" she asked. "So my warriors can stop a person without killing him," he said. She was silent for a long time. Then she nodded, and began to demonstrate, on herself, on a skin-and-bone dummy stuffed with moss, a human figure. The vulnerable points were marked with charcoal. The warriors listened. They memorized. The Gerds memorize slowly, but forever. The Don-ul principle, a minimum of deaths. Not because he is kind, because he is a historian. He knew that peoples who kill too many are met with hatred that lasts for centuries. Rodrigo burned 3 cities, and 400 years later, people still want to wipe out the Gerds. Don-ul will not repeat that mistake. He was 18 when Mila. No one didn't brought her. No one didn't buy it. She came on her own, on foot, across the pass, in men's clothing, with a folder using arm. Guard on outer line patrol spotted her and could believe it. A human girl. Just one. Without weapons. She's up the trail, amid the day, just on a walk. They went out to meet her. 2 gourdas, 7 meters each. She looked at them from below up. 1 meter, 1 meter 5 by 7 meters. She didn't flinched. She didn't run. I didn't screamed. She said in broken Gourdian with monstrous human accent, I need Danul, the one who builds machines. Show the way. The sentries exchanged glances. One of them bent down toward her. His face was about as her torso. Who did he asked. Mila Velt replied, she said. Engineer. The sentries brought her to the camp. She walked between them and tilted her head. I looked at everything, at huts made skins, to the smithy from where did smoke and knocking, from trebuchet standing in clearing behind the camp. When she saw the trebuchet, she stopped. She stood there and looked. A minute, 2. Then I slowly walked closer. She walked it. I touched the frame. I knocked on axle. I felt the ropes. She raised her head and looked at shoulder of the lever, 15 meters above her. Danul was watching from behind the hut. He saw as she was looking. He didn't like a tourist, not like a sightseer, as an engineer, she thought. Right, standing in front of the car, she thought in her head. The ratio of the arms, the mass of the counterweight, the length of the sling. He walked out to meet her. She turned around, looked at him. Ash blonde hair, thin, sharp cheekbones, dark circles under her eyes. She'd been walking through the mountains for 4 days, without proper food, without sleep. You're Danul, she said. Not a question, a statement. He nodded. She held out a folder, blueprints. He took it, opened it, and fell silent. On the first sheet was a ballista, not an ordinary one, a modified one, with a double torsion system, with metal guides, with a sighting mechanism he hadn't seen in any historical work, because it didn't appear in any historical work. It was her own design. She'd come up with it herself. On the second sheet was a hoist, with a pulley system, for lifting heavy objects onto the wall, or for installing a trebuchet frame. On the third, a watermill, to power the bellows in the smithy, so they wouldn't have to pump them by hand, so that the bellows would provide a steady flow of air, so that the temperature would remain stable. He looked at the drawings for half an hour, sheet by sheet, 12 sheets, 12 designs. Some were rough, some were impossible with the materials available, but 3 or 4 were brilliant, genuine, workable, and they were drawn by the hand of a man who didn't just read about engineering, who thought in terms of engineering. He looked up. She was standing in front of him, upright, tense, jaw clenched, fists clenched, eyes ablaze. She was waiting for what she'd heard her whole life. Little girl, stay out of it. It's none of your business. Upstart, know your place. He closed the folder, held out his hand to her, pointed to the entrance of the drafting cave. This is where you belong, he said. Help out. She stood there, didn't move, looked at his hand, then at the entrance to the cave, then at him. Her lips twitched, once. She couldn't say a word, because for the first time in her life, she was treated like an engineer, not like a girl, not like an upstart, not like a problem, like an engineer. She took the folder and entered the cave. Danul heard her sit down at the table, heard her unfold the blueprints, heard the charcoal strike the stone. She began to work. A minute after she went in, without rest, without food, without sleep, she had to make up for 19 years of waiting. She worked for 3 days straight without stopping. Then she collapsed and slept for 20 hours. Then she got up and started again. Danuel didn't interfere. He brought her food. He quietly set it by the entrance. He left. A week later, he came back to check on her. The cave walls were covered with drawings from floor to ceiling. Ballistas, trebuchets, battering rams, assault towers, bridges, cranes, water wheels. She had reworked his trebuchet. She found 4 design flaws. The sling's length was 8% longer than optimal. The counterweight mounting was unreliable in crosswinds. The trigger mechanism was too slow for reloading. The frame was built with excessive structural strength. 2 logs could be removed to lighten the structure by a quarter. He stood there reading her notes. She stood beside him, silently, waiting. He turned to her.
"You're right," he said, "on all 4 points."
She exhaled, long and deep, like someone who had held their breath for 19 years. They began working together. It wasn't easy. He was a theorist. She was a practitioner. He knew the history. She knew the designs. He remembered how things were built in the past. She saw how they could be built better. They argued, every day, sometimes for hours. "The sling should be made of leather, not rope," she shouted. "Leather doesn't stretch. Accuracy is 20% higher." "Leather rots in the rain," he replied. "In the field, rope is more reliable." "You talk like a book," she snapped. "And you talk like a girl who's never seen a siege," he said. Silence. She looked at him. He looked at her. Then they both said it at the same time. A double sling. Leather on the inside, rope on the outside. For the first time, she smiled. Quickly, crookedly, with one corner of her mouth, and she hid it right away. But he saw it. They rebuilt the trebuchet in a month. Mila oversaw the dismantling and reassembly. She stood on a stepladder that Danuel had made for her out of poles and commanded 4 guards, each of whom was 4 times her size. They obeyed her. Not because she was loud, because she knew what she was doing. The Gurdahs sensed that. Confidence. Precision. When a small, fragile person tells you to move a log 2 fingers to the right, and you move it, and everything falls into place. Then you listen. The new trebuchet had a range of 500 paces, a 150-kilogram projectile. Precision. 3 out of 5 shots hit a circle the size of a gourd. Mila stood next to Danuel after the 5th shot. Both were looking at the target. 3 hits out of 5, from 500 paces, with 1.5 centner stones. She turned to him. The wall of the human fortress. 3 meters of masonry. How many shots? He counted in his head. 20, he said. 30 to be safe. She nodded. An hour's work for 1 machine. And if there are 8 machines? 4 minutes, he replied. She looked at the mountains, to the south, where, beyond the ridges, stood human fortresses with double walls 20 meters thick, considered impregnable. 4 minutes, she whispered. And there was something strange in her voice. Not anger, not joy. Awe, before the power they had created together. From wood and iron and ropes and knowledge. From nothing. 5 years between 18 and 23 took place at work, non-stop, exhausting, wonderful. Danuel didn't remember afterward which days. They merged into one long stream, like river, fast and unstoppable. At 19, he brought together 7 clans out of 9. Groom Tan, chief of the Black Moss, arrived himself, without invitation. He stood before the council bonfire and said 3 words. We also want that. It was brought not hostility with people. It was driven by envy. The set of the Ossipi returned home in lamellar armor. The warriors of the White Bone clan arrived at the clan feast with iron axes strapped to their belts, and the Black Moss clan had their own weapons, obsidian knives and clubs made from pine trunks. Just like 100 years ago, just like 1,000. Groomton was proud, but he wasn't foolish. He could see which way the wind was blowing, and he came. Danuel accepted him, no strings attached, no humiliation, or in exchange for knowledge, knowledge in exchange for apprentices, just like with everyone else. The 8th clan, Far Snow, they lived on the northern slope of the Bone Ridge, far from people, far from everyone. They didn't wage war.
They didn't trade. They simply lived. They hunted mountain goats. They drank melt water. They bore children. They died quietly. Their chieftain, Eirin Snow Owl, was old, older than Croshan, 420 years old. She remembered the era of the little tyrant, not from stories, first-hand. She was a child when Rodrigo led the Gird to the south. She saw the cities burn, heard the warriors roar, and saw how those same warriors later lay dead on the slopes when the human army came to take revenge. She didn't want to join the alliance, not because she didn't trust Dan-Ul, but because she remembered. Dan-Ul came to her himself, across the pass, a 3-day journey through the snow, with Rahan, who knew the trail. Eirin sat by the fire, small for a Gird, 6 meters tall, withered. Her gray skin cracked like the bark of an old oak tree. Her eyes were cloudy, but her mind was like ice, clear, hard, sharp. She asked one thing: "How are you different from Rodrigo?" He replied, "Rodrigo came with a sword. I came with charcoal and a stick. Rodrigo wanted to conquer. I want to build." Rodrigo led the Gird to their deaths for his revenge. "I lead the Gird to live for the sake of their children." She was silent for a long time. Then she asked, "What if you're wrong?" "Then kill me," he replied. "In public, at the Council of Fires, before all 9 clans. Kill me and say that I was the second little tyrant, and let my name be a curse. If I'm wrong, I'll deserve it." She looked at him. 420 years in those eyes. 420 years of loss and grief and quiet, stubborn survival. "All right," she said. "We're coming with you. But I'll be watching. The 9th clan, the last, the Iron Horn clan, the strongest, the most numerous, 5,000 Gird. Their chieftain, Thorgrim Ironhorn, was young by Gird standards, 180 years old, 9 meters tall, the tallest Gird on the continent. His arms were like the trunks of 100-year-old oaks. He was the last to join, not out of pride, because of a condition. He wanted to challenge Dan-Ul to a duel. According to custom, the chieftain of the Union must win in battle. That's how it had always been. That's how it had to be. Dan-Ul stood before him. 1 meter 80 versus 9 meters. A man against a mountain. He knew he would refuse, and he knew that refusal would destroy everything he had been building for 10 years. The duel is the only law recognized by all 9 clans. Refusing a duel is cowardice. A coward cannot be a chieftain. He did not refuse. He proposed something else. Not a duel of bodies, a duel of minds. 2 armies, his and Thorgrim's, 50 guards on each side, a training battle. No deaths,
sticks instead of weapons, sandbags instead of stones. Whoever wins is right. If Thorgrim wins, Dan-Ull will leave. If Dan-Ull wins, Thorgrim will join us. Thorgrim laughed, long and loud, so loud that the rocks trembled. 50 against 50, a little man against the best warriors of Ironhorn. Good idea, he said. I agree. Because it would be fun. It wasn't fun. Thorgrim's 50 warriors were stronger, faster, more experienced. Each had fought dozens of duels. Each knew how to strike and how to dodge. Dan-Ull's 50 warriors were weaker, younger, smaller in stature. But they were a formation. 10 rows of 5, shields made of bound poles, spear sticks, discipline, command. They moved as a single entity. Step, strike. Step, strike. Not fast, slowly, like a tide. Thorgrim sent his men into the attack, strong, fierce, each on his own, each a hero, each seeking glory. They crashed into the formation. The first row held firm, the second reinforced it. The third came in from the flank. Thorgrim's warriors found themselves trapped, sticks on 3 sides. It didn't hurt, but it was humiliating. They couldn't turn around, couldn't swing their weapons. The formation pressed down on them, quietly, methodically, without fury, like a machine. 20 minutes later, 30 of the 50 Thorgrim warriors were sitting on the ground with simulated injuries. A sandbag to the chest meant simulated death. A stick to the leg meant a simulated fracture. The remaining 20 stood in a circle, unable to move. Thorgrim stood among them, 9 meters tall, huge, mighty, with a stick in each hand. He could have broken through the formation, single-handedly, with a single blow. But that wouldn't have changed anything. His army had lost. Not to him, to the formation. He thrust the sticks into the ground. He looked around. He looked at Dan-Ull. The little man stood on a boulder behind his formation's line, with a bronze trumpet in his hand. Calm. He hadn't struck a single blow, hadn't thrown a single stone. He'd given 4 orders in 20 minutes, and he'd won. Thorgrim was silent for a long time. Then he smiled, with one corner of his mouth, just like Mila. All right, he said. You've won. It wasn't you who fixed the Dan-Ull, the formation. Thorgrim nodded. Teach me this formation, he said. The Union of Fires was founded that day. 9 clans, 40,000 guards, 1 army, 1 council, 1 plan. Dan-Ull was 20 years old. Fortress Kostarog rose behind 2 years. Dan-Ull was building it not as Gurdaz do, not as people do. He was building it just as they build those who read about star-shaped bastions of Vauban and saw blueprints of the fortress Bam in a dream. The place was chosen Rahan, a mountain plateau at the junction territories Serog Stone and Blue Moss. 3 sides are cliffs. The 4th opens onto a gentle slope, the only approach. Mila calculated the walls, not vertical, slanted. Glacis made of compacted soil and stone. Behind the glacis ditch, dry, 7 meters deep. Then is a wall, 5 meters thick at base, 10 meters in height, made hewn granite. They broke the stone in quarry and carried on their shoulders. One gird carried a stone weighing ton. It took to carts and oxen and a week. Gird carried for hour. Behind the wall, 4 bastions, star-shaped, projecting beyond the line the wall, to shoot through the base, not with crossbows, with trebuchets, small ones, 2 on each bastion. 8 machines capable of showering stones on anyone who approached the wall closer than 300 paces. Inside the fortress, barracks hewn into the rock, a forge with a water wheel, Mila's design. A mountain stream turned the wheel pumped the bellows blew into the blast furnace. The blast furnace burned continuously. The temperature was stable, finally high enough to make steel, not just iron. Taein stood by the new furnace and wept. It was the first and only time Dan-ul had ever seen her cry. She wasn't crying out of grief. She was crying because of the steel. Real steel. Shiny. Ringing. Hard. She had dreamed of this her whole life and didn't even know she was dreaming because she didn't know it was possible. The Soyeon Hospital occupied 3 caves, with windows facing east, all 3 of them. 20 beds. By Gerd standards, 20 stone cots, each the size of a human garage. A pharmacy with 40 types of herbs. A surgical table made of polished granite. Instruments. Steel. Forged by Taein according to Soyeon's blueprints. Scalpels, clamps, and tweezers. Gerd-sized. Each scalpel as long as a human sword. Soyeon stood among her instruments and smiled, quietly, to herself. Dan-ul's headquarters. A large cave with a flat floor. On the floor lay a map carved into the stone. The entire region. Mountains, valleys, trails, rivers. Human fortresses were marked with red pebbles. Gerd positions were marked in blue. The Imperial Army's routes were traced with yellow paint made from mountain ochre. Aurelia had worked on this map for a year. Every detail had been verified. Every distance was measured in the footsteps of Ra Khan, who had traversed every trail from the southern foothills to the Bone Ridge. Dan-ul stood over the map. He was 22. In a year, the Valen Empire would declare a campaign. He knew it. Aurelia knew it. Merchants brought rumors. The heir, Prince Marcel, had grown up. He was 20. He wanted glory. He wanted blood. He wanted the throne. And the throne goes to the victor. Dan-ul's siege corps numbered 400 fighters. Not warriors. Fighters. They are different things. A warrior fights for himself. A fighter carries out orders. 100 crews of 4. 25 crews for the trebuchets. 25 for the onagri. 25 for the battering rams. 25 for the assault towers. Each crew knew its machine. Each crew had rehearsed assembly, disassembly, loading, and firing hundreds of times. Each crew had a commander. For every 5 commanders, there was a senior commander. Hierarchy, chain of command, regulations. Written by Dan-ul, personally, with charcoal on tanned hides. 47 points, including point 14. Do not eat an enemy without a direct order from the squad commander, even if he is small and smells delicious. The Gordas memorized the code by heart, all 47 points. They could not read, but they could memorize. It was read to them once, and they remembered it, forever. Another 500 warriors made up the infantry. Formation. 5 rows of 100. Shields made of wood reinforced with iron strips. Spears. Long ones. 6 meters. For a Gerda, this is like a 1.5 meter stick for a human. Convenient. Maneuverable. With a steel tip crafted by Taein. 100 scouts under the command of Ra Han. Light. Fast. Equipped with mirrors. With signal fires. The network covered all the mountains, from the southern foothills to the Bone Ridge. Any movement within a 3-day radius of Kosterog was detected within an hour.
Don Uhl stood on the wall of Kosterog and looked south. Brookmar stood beside him. Yes, Brookmar. He hadn't left. He hadn't betrayed him. He hadn't challenged him to a duel. He'd done something else. He'd come to Don Uhl at night, a year ago, sat down across from him, remained silent for 5 minutes. Then he said, "I don't believe in your machines. I believe in strength. But my children will live in your world, not mine. My world is dying. I can see it. Give me a place." Don Uhl was silent. Then he replied, "Command the infantry. You're the strongest. They'll follow you." Brookmar nodded. Once. He stood up. He left. From then on, the infantry was his. He drove them hard, ruthlessly, the old way, but in formation, just as Don Uhl had taught him. Brookmar's formation was the best in the army, because every warrior feared him more than the enemy, and obeyed him faster. Now they stood side by side on the wall, the small one and the huge one, the man and the gird, the one who builds and the one who doesn't believe but stands beside him. Brookmar looked south. "They're coming," he said. Don Uhl nodded. The Valen Empire had declared a crusade. 200,000 spears. In the spring. In 3 months. He turned around, looked at the fortress behind him, at the walls, at the bastions, at the trebuchets on them, at the smoke rising from the forges, at the clan banners on the towers. 9 banners, 9 colors, 1 alliance. Then he looked down, into the courtyard. There stood Grumata, in full armor, refurbished, steel, not lamellar, plate armor. Tae-in had forged it herself, every plate. 3 months, just like the first time. Only now the plates were steel, resonant, shining. Grumata stood and looked up, at him, at her son, at the little boy she had pulled from the ruins of the skit 22 years ago, who had cried and reached out to her, who now stood on the wall of the fortress he had built, at the head of the army he had created, facing the war he had been preparing for his entire life. She didn't smile. Gurdas rarely smile, but she nodded. Once. Slowly. The fortress Eisenwacht, iron guard, key to northern front, triple walls, 12 towers, a garrison of 6,000. 200 years not single enemy has came to her closer than 1,000 steps. She stood at the entrance to Mountain Canyon like a traffic jam into the neck of a bottle. Until it stands, the army has passed into mountains. For now, it stands Gurdas in safety. But Don Uhl wasn't hide in the mountains. He was going to take Eisenwacht, and do it that the continent to see it. They went out from Kosterog at dawn, the corps, 400 fighters, 8 trebuchets in disassembled state, each on shoulders of the 4 Gurdas, 4 assault turrets, each of the 8, rams with iron tips by Tae-in, mining teams under the leadership of Mila with pickaxes and shovels and scaffolding, infantry, Brookmara, 500 in formation, with shields and spears, in lamellar armor, not all in steel. They wasn't enough, but there was enough for everyone. Intelligence, Rahan ahead, 30 scouts, invisible, silent. They traveled the route in 3 days to the main column and returned with a full map. Every patrol, every outpost, every post. Soyan walked with the caravan, the hospital on wheels, 4 carts of the Gurdian sizes, each measuring as a human house. Herbs, bandages, splints, tools. 6 medic Gurdoks. Aurelia went on the shoulder Grumata's beside with Don Uhl.
map on her lap. She knew every meter of the route, every turn, every source of water, every place where you can stop and where you can't. They walked 2 days, through mountain trails that Rakan scouted and cleared and marked with stones. The trails were widened in advance. The trees had been felled, the rocks had been removed. Bridges across the gorges have been reinforced. Logistics. Boring. Invisible. Crucial. The army without supply train will perish in 2 weeks. Danul remembered it by heart. They went to Eisenwacht at dawn on the day. The fortress lay below in valley. Danul stood on ridge of the hill and looked. Triple walls. The first wall, 8 meters. The second is 12. The third inner, 15. 12 towers. Square, with battlements, with loopholes for crossbows. A moat, wide, with water. A drawbridge, gate oak reinforced with iron. Behind the walls, the city. Houses, warehouses, barracks. 6,000 soldiers. And civilians. Civilians. How many he didn't know exactly. Aurelia said about 4,000. Women, children, merchants, artisans. 10,000 people of these walls. He must have taken them. He didn't killing a single civilians. He unfolded a map on the rock. All around stood commanders. Teyin, Mila, Brukmar, Rahan, Grumata. He spoke briefly, clearly, without unnecessary words. Trebuchets on the hill. Distance 500 steps to the first wall. 8 cars in a line. Sector of southwest corner. There the wall is thinner. Mila found it on old drawings that Aurelia stole from the archives. Anselm's 3 years ago. Southwest corner was being rebuilt 40 years ago. The new laying on the old foundation. Joint. Weak spot. Battering rams to the gate after that as the first wall collapses. 4 battering rams. Under the cover, assault turrets. Towers on tracks. Each tower 10 meters tall. From a roof made wet hides, against the burning oil. Miners. Mealy to southwest corner. Tunnel under the foundation. Support made of logs. When the tunnel is set fire to the timber support. The support burns down. The foundation sags. The wall is falling. Infantry Brook Mara in reserve. In case of an infantry by the garrison. Not assault. A siege. Methodical. Mechanized. Without heroism, without glory, without unnecessary deaths. He finished. He looked at commanders. Teyin nodded. Her trebuchets were perfect. Each was assembled by her personally. Each axle was forged by her. Each bushing is fitted. Mila nodded. Her miners are ready. She trained them half a year. Everyone knew how to dig, and how secure, and how light, and how run away. Rahan nodded. Her scouts stood at every hill around the fortress. Not a single mouse will unnoticed. Soyon nodded. The hospital was set up in a hollow behind the hill, ready to receive the wounded. Anyone, our own and strangers. Brukmar nodded, silently. Just always. His infantry stood in formation. 500 shields, 500 spears. The land trembled from their breathing. Aurelia placed her hand on map. Well, what had she said? Let's get started. Grumata was standing beside her, in steel armor. She was in the chain of command. She was the leader. But not a commander. The commander was Dan-Ul. She accepted it, silently, in the Gourd style. Just as one the sunrise. He has grown up. He knows more. He leads. She stands beside him. And that is enough. Dan-Ul stood up to command boulder, 2 meters above the ground. From here he could see everything. The fortress, trebuchets, the infantry, battering rams. He raised a bronze trumpet, in-house design. It amplified my voice in 4 times, and cast the first order. Crews, to vehicles, 8 trebuchets, 32 gourdas, each on their place. Loading, aiming. Dan-Ul looked toward southwest corner of the wall. White mark. Mila put last night. It crept up with Rahan in the darkness and drew with chalk a cross on the wall. A landmark. Fire. 8 stones have into the sky at the same time. A whistle, growing louder. 8 black dots against the sky. They rose in arc. They hovered for a moment and went down. The first volley fell broadly. 2 stones against a wall. 3 in ditches. 2 spans. 1 in the field in front of the wall. But 2 stones that landed hit the wall hit into southwest corner. The seam. Stone masonry sprayed with shards. A cloud of dust rose to 20 meters. When the dust settled, Dan-Ul saw a crack. 1, vertical, from tooth to base. 2 stones. 1 volley. A crack in the wall that stood 200 years. The garrison on the walls shouted. He heard the screams. Distant. Faint. Human. Reloading. 3 minutes. Second volley. More accurately. Mila adjusted her aim. She stood on the hill with flags and showed to each calculation the correction. To the left. To the right. Shorter. Longer. 5 stones out of 8 in the wall. The crack has widened. The masonry crumbled. The battlements collapsed. The third volley. The wall in the southwest corner began to tilt. 4th. 5th. On the 6th volley, the wall collapsed. 8 meters of stone masonry. 200 years of impregnability. They collapsed into a cloud of dust and the roar which could be heard behind 10 kilometers. 36 minutes. 6 volley. 48 stones. The wall fell. Dan-Ul did not celebrate. He gave a second order. The rams to the gates. Sappers to the second wall. Trebuchets, shift fire to the second wall. Same spot. Southwest corner. Same seam. It runs through all 3 walls. Mila found it on the blueprints. Shared foundation. Shared weakness. The second wall collapsed by noon. The third by evening. Mila's miners completed their tunnel under the base of the third wall and set the support structure ablaze. The wall sank 2 meters and split in half. The gate was breached with a battering ram at dawn on the second day. Oak gates reinforced with iron. 3 blows. The first, a crack. The second, a breach. The third blow sent the doors flying off their hinges. The garrison fought desperately. Crossbows from the towers, boiling oil, stones. But the walls had been breached. They bypassed the towers. Den-Ul's siege towers rolled up to the breach and unloaded warriors onto the crest of the second wall. From there, they struck the towers from above. They didn't kill. They incapacitated, just as Soyeon had taught. A flat blow with a spear to the legs, the man falls, alive. He won't get up, but he's alive. On the 3rd day, the commander requested negotiations. On the 4th, he came out with a white flag. On the 5th and 6th, they agreed to the terms of surrender. Aurelia led the negotiations, in plain language, clearly, calmly, without threats. Dan-Ul's terms. The garrison lays down its weapons. The soldiers are released on their word of honor. Civilians are left unharmed. Property is left untouched. The city is not plundered. The commander listened. He looked at the breached walls, at the trebuchets on the hill, at the formation of guards in front of the gates. 500 shields, 500 spears, The ground trembled from their breath. And he agreed. On the 7th day, the fortress of Eisenwacht came under the control of the Union of Fires. Not a single civilian was killed. 47 soldiers from the garrison died. 12 guards were wounded. Not a single one killed. Soyeon treated them all. In the hospital behind the hill, guards and humans lay side by side, in neighboring beds. A guard's bed was the size of a room. A human's bed, like a doll's crib, lay next to it, but side by side. Soyeon went from one to the next and treated them. Everyone, without discrimination, just as he had promised. Anselm de Vries stood on a hill 3 kilometers from the fortress. He had watched the entire siege through his spyglass for 6 days. He saw the walls collapse. He saw the infantry enter the breach. He saw the commandant emerge with a white flag. He lowered the telescope. He was silent for a long time. His aide stood nearby, waiting for orders. Anselm said one word, quietly, calmly, as always. Understood. He turned and walked to his horse. He rode to the capital to write a report, one that, this time, would be heard. The night after the fortress surrendered, the moon, the cold mountain air, the stars. Don Uhl sat on the wall of Eisenwacht, on a real human wall, for the first time in his life. His legs dangled over the edge, 12 meters to the ground. A human wall, human stones, human mortar between them. He ran his hand over the masonry. Rough, cold, real. To his right, Grumata sat down. The wall creaked under her weight, but held. She dangled her legs next to his. Her foot was as long as his leg. To his left, Tae-in sat down, a hammer on her lap, soot on her face, as always. Next to her was Aurelia, small, red-haired, wrapped in a cloak. A map poked out from her bosom, a habit. Soyeon sat a little farther away, quietly, carefully. She looked toward the east, toward where, beyond the mountains and the sea, lay her homeland. Rahan was the last to arrive, silently, as always. She simply appeared beside her, like a shadow. 6 on the wall. 3 Gerd, 3 people. No one said a word. A bonfire burned below, a Gerd bonfire in the courtyard of a human fortress. The fire danced on the sentry's steel armor. Somewhere a night bird sang. Don Uhl watched the fire. He was thinking, not about war, not about strategy, not about what tomorrow would bring, about Rodrigo de Almanzor, the infantry captain from Castile, who had come into this world 400 years ago with a sword and fury, who had burned 3 cities, who had killed thousands, who had led his people to disaster. Rodrigo wanted to conquer. Don Uhl wanted to build. Rodrigo rose to power through a duel. Don Uhl through a fallen oak tree, a rope made of bast, and a lever fashioned from a log. Rodrigo led the Gerd to seek revenge. Don Uhl led them to build. The difference wasn't in scale. The difference was in direction. He closed his eyes. Rodrigo, my brother, he thought. I did things differently after all. Rest in peace. Beside him, Grumata placed her hand on his head. Warm, heavy, rough. Just as always. Just like on the first day, when she lifted him from the ruins of the hermitage, when he was crying and reaching out to her. 22 years. Yet her hand was the same,
and the warmth was the same. He didn't move her hand away. He pressed his cheek against it, and sat there like that. On the wall of the fortress that had been considered impregnable for 200 years, among the people and the gird he had gathered, one by one, from the fragments, from the outcasts, from those who were not listened to, not seen, and not allowed in. The blacksmith who was denied a hammer, the scout who was considered useless, the healer who was denied the chance to treat, an engineer who wasn't considered an engineer, a salesgirl who wasn't given a counter, a warrior who didn't believe but stayed. He wasn't building an army. He was building a people, from people and guards, from iron and stone and rope and knowledge. One by one, person by person, guard by guard, stone by stone. In the morning he'll get up, he'll climb down from the wall, and he'll start preparing for the next step. Peace talks, embassies, treaties, borders, trade, schools, the future. But that will be in the morning. Right now, it's night, and the bonfire is burning, and the stars, and the 6 on the wall.
And silence. And everything is fine.